on then.
So
It's more
we're
about
live,
getting
guys. We're live. Bert,
Oh.
you just offered to take your shirt off. I will have all of YouTube know.
That was only after I declined the pants.
All right. So we're trying. I was interested in doing this free will hangout, and I thought maybe I would frame the argument a little bit, or explain sort of as much of a simple way as only I can do, since I only have a simplified grasp. First for a little while, and then sort of open it up to the discussion. So let's see. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting when I was looking for people who wanted to participate is that a lot of people were very apathetic and were like, I don't care so much about free will, or I don't know very much about free will. And I think that's just kind of a side thing. It was hard to find people who were interested. I think that has to do maybe with not fleshing out sort of the moral responsibility implications. So keep that in the back of your head. Maybe we'll get to that, because I think that probably kind of can account for why it's still important. So that's something we maybe could talk about later if we have time. So let's see. Okay, so framing the thing. So you've got the problem of free will and determinism. So what is that about? So sort of like from a layperson's perspective, right? It seems like any time, at any particular time, you are like free to do kind of anything you want within obvious limits, right? So if I wanted to like pick up a pencil right now, and there's a pencil, it really feels like I'm free to pick up the pencil or not, right? So if there's a pencil right here, it seems like anytime you feel like it, you could pick it up or not. And if you do pick it up, it seems obvious that you could have not picked it up. And that is like an obvious intuition that I think safe to say we all kind of have. So if you think about that, it seems also naturally obvious that if you were going to rerun that sort of pencil picking up event over again, that at the time, like right before the pencil gets picked up, it could very easily end with the pencil not getting picked up the second time around. So we have this intuition about stuff like picking up pencils and lifting arms and things like that about ourselves. But we have this competing intuition also, that things are caused. And if you knew everything you needed to know, you could find the cause. And you could trace the cause all the way back to however far back you wanted to go. So, okay, let's say you want to make like a pot of spaghetti. So like this just happened to me. So like you turn on the fire, you fill up your pot, you put the pot on the stove, you blast the thing on high, and then it's going to take at least 8 minutes or so, so you go off and do something else in the interim, and then you forget about it. And then what happened to me just like 2 days ago, I started hearing the hissing, and I'm like, oh, and I run over, and there's water all over the stovetop, and so it's clear that my pot overboiled, right? So if you think about that kind of situation, it's a very different kind of situation. So if you're going to think about it, you put two and two together. Some things are obvious. It's obvious that the pot overboiled. You assume that there's a cause for the hissing sound, and that the water that's now all over your stovetop is all over your stovetop because of a reason. You don't think that the water was free to spill over the top of the pot or not spill over the top of the pot. And not only that, but you don't sort of naturally, intuitively think in an obvious kind of way that if you reran that scene over and over again, oh my God, puppies, that the pot could not overboil.
It's a good argument, I'll grant you.
Like if I backed up the universe to this time exactly, my dogs would all be growling at one another just as they are currently. Okay, so that's sort of the thing. So you have this intuition that when something happens, there's always an explanation. There's got to be an explanation for why it happened, that there's some kind of causal link and series of happenings that go backwards in time that can explain the event in question, even if we don't know what those are, that must be. And coupled with that is the idea, right? Like if you rolled back the universe to any random past moment in time and then pressed play again, that you would get like a real rerun. It would just do the exact same thing. But we don't have those kinds of intuitions when we think about ourselves. So what's going on with that? Why don't we think about the same kind of thing when we think about our own decisions and actions? So on the one hand, it's intuitively compelling that sort of when you do something, you could have done something else. But on the other hand, it seems like there is always a cause and effect thing going on, and so that should apply to us too. So that's kind of the basic idea of the problem. So does anyone want to say anything at this point? Besides, I should shut my dogs up?
I'd refute that with a meow.
And it's done.
Anyway, so how come we think this way about things but not about us? The answer is free will, obviously, right?
I think
we have free will, and things don't have free will. Pots and water don't have free will, but we do. That's like the difference.
I think there's a we could probably start off by just saying that there's a certain predictive quality or a consistency to the interactions in the universe that we leverage, right? We leverage inferences, we leverage, we make deductions about what will occur, and we hypothesize and we test things out, and we operate on this daily, right? We build cell phones, satellites on it. We infer behavior from other people based on certain predictive, certain guesses at what's going to be the case or how somebody will react. When I drive down to work, I'm operating on years and years and years of consistent interactions with the universe to get there. So there's a certain consistency that we leverage, and the question becomes: is that consistency, is that causal quality that we leverage, is that something that permeates all of it, including our interactions, or is there some realm where causality does not play a role, or that some other thing plays a part?
Exactly. Right? That's exactly right. So, like, is there some reason why we don't intuitively apply that to our own internal, like, decision making and emotions and things like that? So when we think about ourselves, we don't do that. We don't apply this learned causality. And is that a real thing? Is there a reason for that or not? So the explanation is free will, and
well, we should probably say that the reason is because we have a it appears to us that we have free will. Like there's a strong impression upon us that we are not directed by or coerced by forces within nature, that we have this feeling of acting freely towards our decisions, that the decisions are ours, that we are making them, that there's nothing that we are free to do as we will at any point, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the intuition that we have.
Yes.
And when you juxtapose that against the predictive causal chain or our reliance on the consistency of the universe, that's where we hit the issue of, okay, is it
Yeah,
an illusion or is it right? So.
Exactly. That's where we hit the issue, right? So yeah, and so do we really have the ability to make our own decisions without being forced? One of the things that I think is sort of at issue with this discussion is the could have done otherwise thing. So, I mean, if you believe you could have done otherwise, then there's reason to believe that you actually have control over your decisions and you weren't forced. So I want to get into that at some point, whenever anybody feels like it. Oh, I know what I want to do real quick. Let's just sort of define, incompatibilism, compatibilism, determinacy, determinism, indeterminism. Let's just sort of define those real quick, and then you guys tell me if you agree with sort of my definitions, because I tried to do like a philosophy thing with them. So I think it goes like this. Incompatibilists are, well, you can define it two ways, but I want to define it this way. Incompatibilists believe that if determinism is true, then free will is false, or the reverse. So they see the two things as incompatible. If determinism is true, there can't be free will, or if free will is true, there can't be determinism. Right? Things cannot be 100% completely determined if, in fact, we have free will. And compatibilists just disagree with that argument altogether. And there's various reasons, where compatibilists try to find the room to say that, in fact, the two things are compatible. That's an interesting situation. And
actually, can I jump in with compatibilism in terms of there's a really succinct way that Schopenhauer put it that gives you an idea of what is meant.
Yes.
It is that a man is free to act as he wills, but he is not free to will as he wills. So basically that you can act on your will, but you cannot will what your will is. And that's in a nutshell the basic concept behind compatibilism.
Okay. Go ahead, because I want to go ahead.
So I think it's hard to slice this up into. There's so many permeations of all the arguments, but generally speaking, determinism or there's hard determinism. And some would say that compatibilism is a reframing of the language, or it's not just semantic, that there is a distinction being made about what we mean by free will.
Yeah, I agree with that. There are these like funky compatibilists or newer compatibilists who are saying, ho, 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 let's redefine free will, because we've been wrong all along about what free will should mean.
That's referred to as soft determinism. It's almost identical to compatibilism with that exception that you just made.
Okay. All right, so I interrupted you, Bert. Go on.
I don't want to characterize all of them, only because I don't hold all of them, so I'm sure I'm going to enter my own bias. But I'll characterize at least the first two, and then somebody can tell me what they mean by in terms of free will, or what they see free will as being. But because this is hard, because we're going to get into it, it might be good to hold off on the in relation to God aspect, and first just kind of talk about raw determinism, free will, outside of the realm of, and maybe we can get into that, because it all of a sudden forks in so many different directions.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky thing to summarize. Determinism would say that all of the interactions within the universe are happening along a vector, a given vector, based on the physical properties and laws at work, and that there is a determined path for everything. That if you knew all of the circumstances, everything, you could predict what the next moment would be.
Mm-hmm.
Some hold to a B theory of time, or a block. I spoke about it in another video about a block universe. That there's that time is another dimension that moments are real at every stage. That past moments and future moments are as real as current moments, and that there's not a indeterminance to what would be the next moment.
Yeah.
Right. And that includes human interactions. Compatibilism, as far as I've read, and I've read a fair bit, is a distinction about what we mean by free will. So compatibilists technically would have a deterministic quality, but they would separate out and parse out what is the will and what is it we mean what are we engaging in, and it would make distinctions such as your volitional will versus things you cannot control, right? Like it would break it down into those parts to better wrap your head around what is meant by all of these things. But what it doesn't do is put in some woo variable that gives you some amount of freedom outside of the causal chain or outside of all that. It's simply a articulation and a distinction of the terms. So.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I agree with that. I think let's talk about sort of the three sort of very general ways to look at this problem. And because compatibilism, to me at least, is the most interesting one, and the funnest one. And so I want to get into it. And also, it's the one I least understand. So I really do want everybody's input on that. But let's first sort of, here's what I thought. I was thinking if we were going to write like a formal, like philosophized sort of statement, and then we could compare the standard views against that statement. So, the propositional attitudes, and that would help us sort of clarify terms, and then we could sort of get into the meat of it. So I was thinking, I see that Max is in here, so that's good. You can tell me if I'm right or not. But I thought the statement could be something like, if determinism is true, then free will is false. And so there are, it seems to me, three ways to approach that, right? Incompatibilists, you've got the libertarian free willers, and they would sort of deny the consequent, right? They would say free will is not false, therefore determinism is not true. But they're still an incompatibilist. They believe that it's one or the other. Then you've got hard determinists who would, I guess, affirm the antecedent. I hope I'm doing this right. So they would say that determinism is true, therefore free will is false. So they are also incompatibilists. So those two stances see free will and determinism as incompatible. And then compatibilists just reject the statement altogether. And there are various ways that they manage to support their rejection of that statement altogether. And that is what, to me, gets really interesting. So does everybody agree that I did that right?
Sure. Yes.
The silence is frightening.
I feel like I would be more comfortable if we had the free will perspective laid out, the libertarian free will perspective. If there's anyone here who would advocate such a position, I'd want to kind of get that out on the table. But I think you did that. I do think you did that right, Helena.
Okay. Is anyone actually libertarian free will all the way? Because I would say that I believe in limited free will. That we have limitations on social status, we have limitations on our genetics, we have limitations on our capacity to learn, we have limitations on finances, the nation that we're born in. So, like, already I would say that there's certain things that you just can't choose for yourself off the book. So I can't say that I'm completely
Can you articulate?
Wildly free will.
Yeah, but I don't
Spackle-
think.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's that's generally not what most people mean when they say libertarian free will. Like, even someone who advocates libertarian free will, if you ask them if tell me a 7-digit prime number, if they can't tell you it, if they can't make that choice, they won't say that they don't have the free will. It's just unknown for them to do that. Generally, like, libertarian free will is that the choices that you make are not fully constrained by your nature or the environment. They are somewhat constrained by your nature and the environment. Like, you can't just choose to fly, but
Right.
because you can't choose to fly, it's not a rejection of free will.
Right.
Yeah, it's like there's the conceptual one that the analogy that he used was the man locked in the room, right? So there's a room that a man's in. Unbeknownst to him, the doors are all locked from the outside. Is he free? Does he have free will to leave the room if he decides to stay in the room and never tries the doors, right?
I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone here is
So-
full on free will.
Again, showing that the physical world constrains free will. Yeah.
It's if you lack the ability, does that mean that you lack the ability to freely act simply because you don't have access, or like is that a constraint on your will?
Right, so we're jumping right into sort of, I think that might be sort of old compatibilism or traditional compatibilism, or approaching something like that. I wish we had a certain clarifier here who couldn't make it, but so you're giving the locked room example, which I've heard before, right? And I think that it's sort of it's an approach to compatibilism, or a thought experiment that at least forces people to consider compatibilism, but it also brings in.
I don't think it's that. I think it actually is a tool to tease apart what one means by what one means by free will, what one means by a freedom to act, right? And what the constraints are within that.
Right. So you've got a person who is choosing to stay in a locked room, but he doesn't know that the room is locked. Right? That's sort of the basic idea of that. Correct?
Right, yeah, because he never actually chooses to leave the room. So
Yeah. He never chooses to leave the room, so he can't discover that the room is actually locked.
Right.
Right. Okay. So let's sort of look at that little experiment, right? So if it's about the absence of external constraints on your behavior, right? So that an action is free if you could have done otherwise, literally, if you wanted to. Like the guy then is experiencing an episode of free will, right? Because it wouldn't matter that his desire, whether or not his desire was causally determined. It's really, in that situation, it could be about whether or not he was constrained to behave in a certain way, right?
Yeah, I think libertarian free will within that is that the individual could act any number of ways, right? He has any number of choices available to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the prerequisites for libertarian free will, is that there are multiple
Alternative possibilities.
Alternative possibilities. You are able to act any number of ways, or not any number of ways, but a given number of ways, that you have access to choices, essentially, that you can act along.
Right. Okay.
If I could say something real quick, that I think it's important that Bert kind of touched on is, a lot of times when we talk about free will, nobody really knows what we're talking about, right? Like, define free will. Let's figure out what free will is, and then free from what exactly.
Okay.
So that's where a lot of these different views come from. They're defining it differently. They're operating completely differently. But what am I free from? Am I free from causality? Am I free from, like, what am I free from?
Right,
These are questions that have to be answered.
I read that Campbell had sort of started this and had some pretty good sort of characteristics. I was running by you guys and see if you agree with them, if that's all right. So hold on a second. I think that, so first of all, it's free will doesn't apply to external stuff, right? It's about our internal stuff going on. Does everyone agree with that one?
What do you mean by internal?
Shanna, seriously?
Yeah.
Psychology or your desire or your will, right? Something internal.
Let me hold on. You guys talk about it. I'm going to see if I can find. I know I took notes about this.
Wait,
I still think external things can affect your internal desire or choices. So I don't know.
No. Wait, I don't think that's the distinction. I think it's actually that we're not talking about is someone coercing or some active agent coercing your actions, right? I think that's the distinction.
Agency.
It can't be talking about external, because determinism is all about the physical determinism, right? So when we're talking about free will, and we're trying to make distinctions, one thing that we're putting off the board is nobody's talking about another agent or some type of coerced force action or some other person forcing your hand. Like, that's not what we're discussing. Isn't that what I thought? That's what you were saying, Helena?
Yeah. So let's try to sort of at least pick out sort of the most important, at least with respect to what matters, the most important sort of features or characteristics about what free will could mean.
One really good distinction that I hear made is the freedom to deliberate. That you can deliberate on a course of action. That you have the ability to consider various choices.
Yeah.
Yes.
So wouldn't it have to be? Wouldn't I put on there earlier? Wouldn't making something actualizing something have to be part of that as well? Because I could imagine where I have a catatonic entity of a person or even a plant that has a mind or something, right? And it can sit there and deliberate, but it can't.
Wait, a plant that has mind?
No, I'm. This is no, a plant can't. Not.
No. I'm just trying to imagine. Did you say?
Just conceptually, just something.
Okay, so imagine a plant that has mind.
Something that can't act, right? But it can deliberate. But but it can't actualize anything.
Okay.
Mic check.
So the question is, does it have?
Yeah,
the question is, does it have free will or not? Xbox?
My question wouldn't the ability to actualize things have to be in there with deliberation?
Oh.
So free will then would be defined as rational deliberation between various options.
Yeah, it's those options. So that's the bit that I got to is. You couldn't have a choice about something unless you had several options available to you.
Mm-hmm. And the rational deliberation part is probably the thing to most focus on, because plants, animals cannot rationally deliberate between said options.
Watch it.
I mean, with that, maybe with some higher order apes, it's more disputable, but at least with plants, you definitely can. Plants cannot rationally deliberate.
Right? Yeah. Let me make it a little easier. It was a conceptual. I was just trying to find something. A computer that I programmed to deliberate between two options. Right? It can't do anything but deliberate between these two options. It can't ever act. So is the deliberation itself the free will?
No, because for the computer, it's not rationally deliberating. So humans and computers have very different ways of going about things. Human beings, we actually have phenomenon intentionality. Our thoughts can be about particular things and objects. Computers, what they mostly do is manipulate syntax, and then they have processes, and that's just derivative from that. So they don't really have any kind of phenomenal experience. They just act as their programming would have them.
Yeah, and from a determinist view, we're saying the same thing. I mean, That's the same thing happening in a person.
Yes.
That's why I'm asking how you escape to free.
Yeah, I think you're going to run into problems here where if you take like an ant that is just reacting based on chemical stimuli and a series of processes, it doesn't have.
Can I just slip something in? That word "just," okay, and continue.
Sure. Certainly. Okay. It's your hangout. Go for it, Helena.
That's it. I just wanted to say "just," and then let you continue.
Okay. So I just want to say that that restricting, if you go down the course of rational deliberation and you start cutting off that processes that operate along a causal, right? So like for instance, ants, I would consider do not rationally contemplate their action. They're acting based on complex interactions. But I myself, as a determinist, would also think that I am behaving off of that, right? So I think it's a little tricky to. I think you need.
Right. I think it comes to the higher order processes that we have over ants. I just want to make one point.
Okay, hurry up, because I'm going to forget.
Just to go back to the computer thing, the fact to focus on isn't the fact that computers are determinant in the sense of just being products of cause and effect. What I meant is computers do not rationally process the world in the way we do. Their programming is very determined in the sense that what they do is always what they mean. So when you program some kind of language into the computer, it's always going to act according to that language. When it comes to human beings, on the other hand, if I was to tell another human being, I love you, or say in Arabic, ana betibbek, both those terms have very indeterminate connotations as compared to one another. Computers, on the other hand, just have one term that means one thing, and that process goes over and over and over again. I don't want to get build up. It's just a manipulation of syntax.
I don't want to get too deep into it, but programming necessarily doesn't work that way anymore. It's not linear in that way. But I don't want to get deep into computer programming.
All right.
Okay, so I've already forgotten what I was gonna.
Okay, then I'll go.
Okay, go.
I disagree so much.
What do you disagree with? Oh my God, this is so cool.
Kick her.
Shut your face.
You don't have the freedom to disagree.
Just shut the fuck up, whoever said kick her. I want to hear the disagreement.
Right, so no. I'm so excited.
You have the free will to control your emotions and get out your concept.
Oh boy. Okay, so something I want to say first of all. Okay, for me personally, this might seem a little strange with me being in this hangout, but I think free will is almost a meaningless thing. I think the idea of it's kind of whatever. If the universe is strict determinism, then us even having the conversation, we have no choice but to have this conversation, and the outcome will only be the outcome that it will be, regardless of anything that we say or do, right? So it's like, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of even having the damn conversation. But we didn't have a choice to in the first place, and whatever.
But Shanna, but how can you think that when you also use quantum mechanics to back up your idealism?
Also, I could just say, well, computers don't really exist. They're just a byproduct of our mass consciousness.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So you are just
finish your point, please.
Ashamed of yourselves. Go spend 5 minutes in the corner and think about what you've just done. Logic and philosophy both. Back.
All right, go on.
All right, look. So we react. Even our emotions, like love. These are all chemical reactions going on in our brain.
Yeah.
Right? You can. Literally, they've done studies, the almighty, the greatest research institute in America, they've done studies showing that, you can have two people sit and speak with one another, and they can reveal intimate personal information with one another, and then stare into each other's eyes for roughly, 10, 15 minutes or something like that, which is an incredibly long time if you think about it. And their bodies will start releasing all those feel-good hormones that we do when we're in love. And of those participants, many of them actually did go on to fall in love and be married, which is interesting, I think. So, I mean, the chemical reactions going on in our body and going on in our brain determine our mood and determine, how we respond to certain things. I mean, and these are things that we can watch happening. There's other studies, and I don't know the exact one. It's been so long. That sucks. Stupid brain. But we can literally map, through the brain, a decision that's going to be made by the participant a good chunk of time before the participant actually clicks the button to make the decision, right or left.
Yes,
red
yes.
or
I mean, those are classic studies.
Right.
We don't want to get into them, but I think that...
Well, I think that they're important to address Epi's point, because, he's saying that, we're different than the ant, we're different than the ape, we're different, we have this higher level of, well, not necessarily. That's not necessarily the case. Simply because we're aware that we're aware, it doesn't then follow that we've somehow broken this causal chain, because we can demonstrate otherwise.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you completely, because I think it sounds like, by the way you're talking, that I'm kind of on the same page with you, but I would say that then what we need to talk about is when somebody refers to free will, what are they referring to? And that's the deliberation portion, right? I think we need to go back to...
That's where the question
comes.
And
that's what compatibilism attempts to do, is go, okay, what is it then that we are actually referring to?
Right, okay, so compatibilism really does help us figure out what aspects of free will do we even care about, right? What is important if we're going to keep the phrase free will around? Right, and I think that compatibilism helps that, right? So, and I also think, and I think everybody would agree, that one of the things that's important about free will or determinism is this issue of moral responsibility. So that is really connected with this could have done otherwise, and Frankfurt is great. All about that issue of could have done otherwise, right? But so let me just give you, I found this list of sort of one of the firsts, maybe, I don't know, I don't have enough education to know if he really was one of the firsts. In my opinion, he's one of the firsts. Campbell, who sort of tried to pick out the characteristics of free will, were it to exist, right? Assuming it does exist, that we care about, and that could help us sort of refine what we all mean, so we could all get on the same page. So I'm going to just read this list off to you because I found it, and then after I read the whole damn list, you guys can say what you think. So first of all, what really matters is the responsibility aspect, the moral responsibility aspect, the implications of whether or not free will exists or not. The important parts of that are about moral responsibility. All right? Freedom, what does that mean? It means that freedom then is the kind that is required for moral responsibility to exist. Okay, so also applies to the internal parts of you. Also, the action. Let me see. Let me read my note here. Action comes from free will if the person was the sole cause of the choice to take the action. That's okay. So that implies sort of that you have to make allowances for the factors of the internal self that the person didn't choose. All right. Okay. Then there's the could have done otherwise, and then it looks like Campbell tried to solve things by saying that character is different from self, and that self is not this bundle of like emotions and personality traits and dispositions and aspirations and things like that, that you can call character, and then you can call some other thing self, and that way this character of you and this self of you can interact, and that part probably doesn't matter, right? So when we want to try to come to a definition of free will, I think I agree with the important aspects of free will, whether it exists or not, are related to the implications with respect to moral responsibility. I agree with that one. I agree that, therefore, when we talk about free, we're talking about the kind of freedom that's required for moral responsibility to be attributed to a person. I agree that it applies to the internal part. And I think the could have done otherwise is really interesting, because at first blush, it looks like that's really important. But you've got these compatibilists who are like, no, that's not even important at all.
Right.
Right? So, okay, so what do you guys think about those several characteristics I just listed?
Yeah, let me add real quick. I think this is where kind of rationality comes into it whenever you start bringing in the morality to free will. Because you always hear like what's 2 bottles of fizz and which one's true, or stardust bumping into stardust, what's immoral about that? Well, these things don't become moral issues until you start having a rational mind, right? They're not inventions of a mind, but they are, or not conventions of a mind, but they're things that minds deliberate about. But there doesn't need to be a otherwise aspect to that. Even down a causal chain of my brain was developed to function in this way, so I think this certain way, so I hold others accountable for this same causal chain goes down there. I just don't see where the otherwise comes into play in that at all. To choose otherwise, or to do otherwise, or to hold responsibility even doesn't go out the window because there is no option to do otherwise.
Well, Immanuel Kant would argue that.
I would call soft determinism in a conversation like this.
Okay.
The Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant argued or reasoned, ought implies can. If somebody ought to do something, like someone has a responsibility of not killing somebody else, then that means that they have that capacity not to kill somebody else. Yet, if you were to deny this, that, oh no, ought doesn't imply can, well, consider something else like a toaster oven. How could you be mad at a toaster oven if it malfunctions for setting your house on fire? You might be mad at the manufacturer, but the toaster oven didn't really do anything, didn't consciously try to set your house on fire. It was just doing what it was doing.
No, hold on a second. Yeah, if you can deliberate on your actions and you can act, even if what you would will to do is set, right? You have choices before you, and included in the causal matrix that impacts that choice is the prior deterrence or the application of justice to others or your upbringing or other things, right? So just because I believe in determinism and the causal quality to my will, it doesn't mean that that justice or other things aren't then relevant. They are the very things that inform or are part of that causal matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are they a part of that causal matrix?
One's a deterrent. So justice is a deterrence instead of retribution, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. What it would mean was that I, for instance, do not believe in revenge. I think revenge is immoral. I think that undue pride, I've brought this up before. I'm an animator at DreamWorks. I have certain skills I've acquired. My life is a giant result. I'm the sum total of the causal events up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
My parents raised me in a way where I have these things, but they're part of that causal quality, right? Mm-hmm. And so my will is the sum total of those things. And as I'm having this discussion, I'm the product of that. But your guys, but if I were to do something wrong, or if I was to do something right, praise or punishment is also a factor, right? Like it helps deter or encourage certain behaviors by the causal quality. So it doesn't mean that's the big thing that I have a problem with, is that people think that determinism means that justice is meaningless. It means that justice means something different for me. It doesn't mean revenge, and it doesn't mean and just as much as I don't believe in undue pride, that I should elevate myself above others. I am fortunate to be in the position I'm in. I didn't somehow act outside of myself to raise myself up, right?
Yeah, Yeah, that's pretty much the answer I would agree with myself. I mean, although maybe I'd frame it a little differently, when somebody commits themselves to certain inactions, even if they're determined to do so, in terms of committing to it, you're also, in a sense, committing to the possible consequences in which other people will see you committing that action. There was a very interesting court case about two boys who, influenced by the literature of Nietzsche, decided to kill somebody in cold blood. Um, their lawyer actually defended them by saying, well, they were determined to do so. They couldn't help what literature they read and what place they were born in and all that stuff. Yet there's something to say about them when doing said action, knowing that other people would not be happy with them killing that other boy. Yet when they did do that, they committed themselves to the action and as well as the consequence, knowing what would happen if they would get caught. So yeah, it's not hard to justify even justice being retributive in a sense. I'll go even one step further than Bert, because usually when people note that justice is a virtue, and you commit yourself to an evil action nonetheless, then you're also committing to yourself justice being done to you in return. So I think the case could be made even stronger for maybe more traditional ideas of justice, as opposed to ideas of justice which focus on deterrence as opposed to retribution. But that's more of an ethical disagreement me and Bert have, as opposed to one that focuses on this.
See, I think retribution is probably the weakest form of justice, so I disagree with you too.
Wait, I don't subscribe to retribution though.
Oh no, she's talking to me.
Yeah, she's talking to Max. What's interesting to me, Holy, about what you just said, is that you're a compatibilist, right?
I would be. I mean, honestly, I'm in the deep end of the pool here, so I think I'm a compatibilist,
okay.
Theologically in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But philosophically, I'm still kind of catching up. I mean, I understand that I think Hume is a compatibilist, and I've read a little bit of him, and I haven't read Dennett really, so, you know, again, I'm a little bit out of the loop compared to you guys. So, am I a compatibilist? Probably. I think that we have limited free will. I think that we have the ability to make choices with the capacity that we have. You know, I think we have the ability to deliberate, and I think that we could go back in a different circumstance, and like if we could rewind time, we could choose differently.
Wait, can I ask something?
Wow, that's amazing that you think that.
Wait, let me ask. Well, let me ask something about that, because
go, Bert.
If you think you could choose otherwise, if all of the variables were all the same?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can make different choices.
So that's not a compatibilist view. So compatibilism would say that what is meant by it is that you can act according to your will, as I said before, but you can't will what your will is. And so by that, it means that your will is a determined variable. It's one of the many variables. It is the acting agent that has been caused by everything else up to that point. And you can deliberate on your course of action, and you're free to deliberate. You're free to consider both choices, but you're going to will what you would have willed. And were everything all the same, there's not some woo variable in there that allows you to...
Okay, so you are going to will what you're going to will, but can you choose what you ought to do even though you don't particularly will it?
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. You were saying two different things there, because in determinism you have choice and deliberation, right? But then you said if you rewind time, you could choose otherwise. That's where the free will aspect of what you're saying comes in. But
that's right. So if you think that you could, if you rewound time and literally all of the conditions were exactly the same, nonetheless, you could do otherwise.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
Traditionally, you would be classified as an incompatibilist, right? You don't believe the two things are compatible at all.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Could I defend the libertarian position for a minute? Because I do think it is possible.
I would love to hear a defense of the libertarian position.
Well, can I ask back on what she said, before we get too far away from it? Because when you say you could rewind it and you could choose to do otherwise, or you could choose to do something else, can you explain where that comes from, where that belief comes from, or how you get to that point?
You're asking her why she thinks that, or why she thinks such a thing could occur.
Right. Why it should occur.
What are you asking me?
I think, for instance, justice has sort of relied upon us being able to do what we ought to do, not necessarily what we want to do. I think that we often will have multiple choices in a situation, not one choice, and we could choose between multiple choices. So we might actually have limited choices on what we can do. Like, I can't move in any direction and do. I'm not one of those people that thinks I can do anything that I want in a given situation. But given the tools and capacity that I have in my psychological condition, what I believe is right, my relationships, all these kind of factors, giving into the factors of what I have and the variables, I think that you could look at situations as having multiple choices.
No, I agree.
Within those multiple choices, I can choose one, and I could choose differently.
I want to jump on this.
Okay.
Xbox, you go ahead. But this is a great introduction to Frankfurt. And I think that Max would be interested in this, and maybe Cliff too, and I don't know who all else. But go ahead, Xbox.
Yeah, please speak over me if you need to talk, and I'm taking over the show.
I need to talk. Sorry.
No, shut up. Not you, Max. Everybody else. No, I agreed with you up on everything. I think we have multiple choices and all these things and deliberations, but I'm not sure how I could, given all the same variables, what factor would come in there that would ever make me choose otherwise, would make me choose something different than I chose the first go around. Unless I had new knowledge of me going through it once and then redoing it with that new knowledge. I'm not sure how I could ever choose something different without a new variable coming in, which would be free will, but I'm not sure where that new variable comes in.
I mean, I look at like the weirdest situations. Okay, like in junior high, I got into a fist fight with a boy. I'm just gonna weird story.
Did you kick his ass?
I did.
Fucking A.
And then I was like the villain of the youth group because they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you kicked his ass."
They all took his side.
But he called me a bitch, and I had been bullied and stuff like that, and so I couldn't help the bullying. I couldn't help that, I'm mad. I couldn't choose my emotions. But what I did choose to do is dump my drink all over his head, which then caused a brawl. And it literally caused a brawl, and they were like, "Oh, should we send them both home?" Like it turned into this major drama, and we were literally chasing each other around a rented condo, beating each other up. and so I became famous for somebody that got into a brawl. Now, could I have chosen differently? I look at the point where I poured the drink over his head, and I go, I can't choose my emotions. I can't choose what decided, he pushed my shame button, or it all added up. I can't choose anything differently, but I could have choose the action of where I dumped a drink over his head. So I probably had multiple choices on how to react to this dude, but I chose the one that would incite violence.
I don't think I disagree there. I don't think I disagree that we have multiple choices that presented to us, and we could have picked any number of them.
One of the frameworks for libertarian free will, and maybe I could just use your example, Spackle, is one by Robert Kane, who is himself an atheist, and he's a professor of philosophy at the University of Texas. He has a two-stage model of free will, which is what most libertarian philosophers usually advocate for. So there's the free part and the will part. The will part suggests this, like when you were deliberating on your decision to pour that drink over that guy's head, there are multiple frameworks just going right through you. Do you drop the drink on his head? Do you hold back, not drop the drink on his head? Do you just let it go? And kind of like all these options in terms of these emotions are just building up inside of you, and and you are willing all of them at the same time, and then just a mass chaos is going on between these options. And one of them, and this is where the free part comes in, indeterminately, none of them was determined to happen, just actualizes itself. It just happens, and you dump the drink over your head. It's free because you could have done otherwise, but at the same time, you willed all those options. None of those options just randomly popped right out of your brain, like a bit of quantum mechanics. So there was a will stage, and there was also a stage where it was free. And
can I ask a question about that? Just because you breezed over it pretty quickly. When you say that there was an indeterminate factor that then flipped the decision one way or the other, that could be otherwise, that indeterminate action, you're saying, wouldn't be something that you would be in control of.
Exactly. That's not something you were in control of. All the things that you willed were what you were in control of, but what ultimately ends up happening is just a truly free act. So, yeah. So it's kind of like if your mind is a hat and all the possibilities are just ricocheting and you're just pulling one, then yeah, it's kind of analogous to this. And it's not a terrible model. I mean, I wouldn't say so. Yet at the same time, and it's kind of intuitive, but at the same time, I don't think it really works well with what we know of at least the physicalist conception of the mind. I think it might be more appealing if you were a substance dualist or a dualist of some kind, or even an idealist, but not a physicalist.
Essentially to say that, I mean, in his model, that your ultimate decisions are completely, like your parenting and whatnot go out, and whatever this indeterminate thing is, it's going to do what it does.
It's just going to do what it does, but out of all the options that it could have done, they were all willed by you. But it would exclude things like maybe chucking your baby out the window, because there are a lot of things in place to make sure you're not even just going to will that from the get-go, biologically speaking.
Isn't there a Rush song that covers this? I think there's a Rush song.
Yes. Do.
Free, what is it? Free bacon?
Free will.
Or free,
Free will.
Free will.
It's a clever name.
Awesome song.
Well, I think we're still back to the same point that we're really unclear of what free will means.
Yeah, if I can just address a couple of points, which is one of the things I'm kind of getting out of it. I come from a non-philosophical background, so I appreciate the point that you guys are talking about is not necessarily related. However, it seems to me there's a definitional issue of scale, by which I mean that in the higher functions, that's where we're looking for free will. We're not really looking for free will down at the molecular level, at chemistry level, right? Because that seems very hard to say that the chemistry is determined to my ears.
Yeah,
so,
and like on that level, you get indeterminacy, right?
Yeah.
Why do you get indeterminacy?
Like if you go far enough down, then you do have to deal with indeterminate events.
You don't even have to go that far down, really.
Yeah, there are some quantum experiments that show this indeterminacy, but I'm still not set that they show that the universe is indeterminate.
I don't think they do either. I'm just saying that. What is it? Usually that's kind of just ignored. You're right. Ultimately, what you were saying at the beginning, Simon, is that it's mostly at a higher scale.
But the higher scale is just the aggregate of the determinate physics at the lower scale, right? And there is a argument that's made for quantum indeterminacy, but first off, most physicists who are involved in that type of discussion don't think that it's on the scale that it actually influence behavior or actions on the scale that we operate on. But any more so than those indeterminacies impact the fact that I have a house with walls right now and it's not falling apart, right? It's still there's still a predictive quality at the larger scale that we can rely on.
But I would say it's not even down to the quantum level. You just don't need to go down to that level.
Hold on a second. Let's entertain the idea.
Helena, please.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
Thank you. Some of these experiments that they've done in quantum physics, they've done this with atoms, right? So it's not just down at this itty-bitty tiny little scale that doesn't matter, right? And these are, I would argue, two sides of the same coin. So, I mean, if you're going to, I think in my view, that if somebody's going to argue for determinism, they'd have to be able to follow that all the way down, right? They can't just get to the point where it doesn't make sense to them, and I don't mean that in a derogatory, insulting way.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
they can't get, shut your face. But they can't get to the point where it's like, oh, no, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, actually, it does. It, in fact, does. This is a part of the universe that you're dealing with. And they could, like I said, they had done some of these experiments, like the slit experiment, then there's the delayed choice quantum eraser.
Yeah.
Got that one. They've done this with atoms. You are made of atoms.
Yes.
So it does, in fact, matter. Your brain is made of atoms. You know, the chemicals that are affecting your brain are made of atoms. And these things are shown to behave kind of wonky occasionally.
Okay, so everybody shut up except for me.
Kind of wonky.
Cliff. And hey, I'm in the middle of saying who can talk. Me, Cliff, and Shanna.
Yay, I made it.
All right. So, because Shanna, I know, you know, I have a very, very sketchy understanding of sort of your global ideas, but I do think that quantum mechanics plays an important part in the way that you, I don't know, justify is a stupid word, but it's part of what allows you to believe in idealism. And I also heard
justifications that I have for my position. Is that what you mean, Helena?
Well, I don't want to say justification because it sounds like, you know, that you know, oh, you found a way to talk your way out. You know,
justification, that's a philosophical word in an argument, right? So that's
okay. So as long as you're cool with it, I'm cool with it, right?
I'm not a word Nazi. It's not a big deal.
So you use quantum mechanics very, very. You know, I heard you once use quantum mechanics to sort of support your idealism. Also, I once heard Cliff use quantum mechanics to suggest that there may be a way to, you know, quote unquote rescue free will if you go the indeterminate route. So I think the two of you, I mean, that's to me fascinating, and I would love to sort of hear the two of you talk about it because right now, Shanna, you seem to be arguing kind of against the idea that quantum mechanics might allow for compatibilism. Whereas I know in the past you've said quantum mechanics might allow for idealism. So that's kind of the conversation I'd like to take place right now between Cliff and Shanna, if the two of you agree. If not, screw the whole damn thing and we'll go to a different topic.
And I don't mind. Shut up, Xbox. God, I'm so abusive to you. I don't mind at all, but Cliff said in the side chat here that he liked me and he didn't want to tell me I was wrong unless I insulted him. So what kind of insult would you like, good sir? I've got plenty to choose from. I have a complete array.
Pick your insult and let's get the ball rolling.
What, are you an atheist? What are you? Like, what do you do? What's your thing?
I don't use labels.
Do what?
I don't use labels.
You don't use labels. That's stupid. There you go. There's your
All right.
He gave us
properly insulted. Can we discuss quantum mechanics? Because I've got sort of a brand new thing that I thought of, but I don't know if I want to share it. I want to hear this quantum mechanics discussion first.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that quantum mechanics rescues free will by posing determinism. What I will say is quantum mechanics doesn't entail indeterminism. It doesn't entail uncertainty. People think it does, but it doesn't.
Okay, Cliff, you weren't the guy I was thinking of.
I was like, well, I don't really.
All right, so you just said that if reality is literally indeterminate, that doesn't. What does that not entail that sort of ordinarily would think it must entail?
No, quantum mechanics doesn't entail indeterminism.
Oh.
If people think quantum mechanics means that things are uncertain, that they're not determined, that entailment is not there. It's popularized.
Right. And I kind of agree with that, right? I don't think that if we can point to one thing in the universe and say, oh, hey, look, we can't figure out X, Y, Z, that it then follows that the rest of the universe has the same rule. Just like I don't think that it logically follows in any good way at all that if we can point to something that is, direct causal chain going on that we can say, oh, well, look at that. Now the rest of the universe is X. I don't think that follows either. So you might not be getting the scrap you were looking for.
Right. So the main argument that people make for quantum indeterminacy comes over the Copenhagen model, which is an interpretation of quantum mechanics. And it's the most popular one. And the reason why it's the most popular one... Sweet, I'm getting an echo.
Ooh, can you mute your mic if you're not talking?
You're becoming the mute Nazi. If I mute you, it's because you're echoing or something like that.
It's not me.
It was.
No, it wasn't. Go back to the conversation.
Okay, so the reason why the Copenhagen model is so popular is because the math is very tractable. You can do it with basically first-year calculus. And because it's so tractable, it's what people is introduced to, and also it's what most of the work has been done. There's some great work done on it. But what you have to be very careful of is just because a model works, making the next leap and saying reality actually is the way that model works is a very tenuous one. There's an entire another view of quantum mechanics called Bohemian mechanics, and it's fully deterministic. There is no uncertainty principle, there is no indeterminism, everything is fully deterministic. The problem is that interpretation is far less tractable because it requires you to look at not only the objects, it also requires you to look at something else, which is called a pilot wave. It's so intractable that it's never taught, usually, unless somebody specifically wants to look for it. You can do an entire degree, you can do an entire graduate degrees in physics, and you'll not even be aware that this thing actually exists. But there are people who are doing foundational work in it, and some of the most exciting things, experiments that are being done on it right now, are showing quantum mechanical effects on a pure visible scale, as in objects like the size of your fingertips are showing quantum mechanical effects, and it's being modeled under Bohemian mechanics, so it's quite interesting. Now, I wouldn't say that that means the universe is entirely deterministic either. All that I would say is that there is both a deterministic model and an indeterministic model. One is based on random variations, and both of them can produce the same results. We really don't know if God is throwing dice or not.
And I agree with that completely. Sorry, Helena.
No, it's okay. I was just thinking, So, Cliff, you said that...
If I could just add something onto that real quick.
Okay, go.
It's also important. He's like, okay, fine, God.
God.
This chick. I think it's also important to remember that taking philosophical implications from things like this, that's a careful leap that has to be made. Right? You can't just look at one experiment or two experiments or three experiments or four experiments and then start pulling out all of these philosophical consequences from them. That has to be done carefully.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. I think we all kind of, well, I guess I just assumed we all understood that. This is just for fun. We're just having fun. We're just sort of speculating mutually, right? It doesn't have any...
I say that more for the sake of people that may be, listening in the future, and
for
someone in the room that might not, get that. And be like, what the hell are these guys talking about?
What are you talking about? I thought we were here to win each other, having fun.
Oh, is that what we're doing? I can do that too.
Therefore God, and I found it, so we're okay.
Been wasting my time, I guess.
All right, so somebody, I think it was Max, was saying that, Max, did you say that you liked Frankfurt, or that you agreed with Frankfurt, or you said something about Frankfurt? What was it?
Oh, I am a Frankfurtian when it comes to compatibilism and free will. I'm a compatibilist. I agree mostly with Frankfurt on the issue, and I do not agree with libertarians that the ability to do otherwise is consequential to free will or ingredient to free will.
Okay, this is so fabulous, because I'm just thrilled we have an expert on Frankfurt, because the Frankfurt sort of thought experiments are so cool and so fun, right? So how about if first you sort of explain, so you've got to first explain Frankfurt's objection to sort of traditional or whatever sort of compatibilistic arguments that were going on when he entered the fray, right? So that we can understand the difference and how his compatibilism is different. Then after that, let's do some Frankfurt thought experiments. I'd love to do that. Those are so fun.
Okay, so classical free will is just defined as doing what you want to do. So if you have a desire to do something and you accomplish it, that's your free will. And like that was the free will of David Hume and also Thomas Hobbes. But Frankfurt didn't really go that route. Rather than just affirming determinism and just agreeing that free will is just doing what you desire to do, Frankfurt just applied that it doesn't matter whether or not determinism is true. Whether you have the ability to do otherwise or not isn't ingredient to free will. If you don't have the ability to do otherwise, then it just means that something else is ingredient to free will. And for Frankfurt, these were just high order or higher level thought processes that human beings had. And he utilized Frankfurt thought experiments to illustrate this. For example, let's say you're a Democrat, but you sometimes swing Republican. If
I can interrupt you before we sort of go into the example, let's see if we all kind of get that, right? So let's look at this person who is in a room and is choosing to stay in the room. However, the door is locked, but he doesn't know the door is locked, okay? So does he have free will when he's staying in the room, or does he not have free will when he's staying in the room? I think that Frankfurt says that there's an inference that, and I hate to bring up moral responsibility, but after all, that's what's important, right? But so, my dogs, that the person, let's see. Let me think about this for a second. This is new. Yeah, I think that Frankfurt is saying that it's really not about whether or not the door is locked. It's about the person who's sitting in the room. So he's saying the external constraints are not what we care about. We care about what's going on inside. And there are, in fact, internal constraints. And so that's where he brings up this hierarchy business that you were mentioning. God. So, like, for example, you've got these basic wants, but we, and he says, are unique among the animal kingdom in that we have second-order desires or wants or wills, right? So we can want to want something. We can wish that we wanted something. We can wish that we didn't want something. So that's sort of one of the things he's talking about. And that sort of has a parallel in sort of positive psychology and self-help books and things like that. When you think about this idea, I think everybody knows about this. Like, what is your higher self telling you? It sounds wooey, but I think that that is sort of maybe, and I'm a newcomer at this, so if I'm wrong about this, Max, please fix it. But I think that that's kind of what he was getting at, is this higher self idea. Right?
Yeah, I think you articulated it very nicely. We have these higher order desires, wants, needs, wishes, and that's something we kind of bring to bear on our decision making. And this is ultimately our kind of internal or psychological life, inner reflection that we have when contemplating our ideas and our goals and our actions and what we want to do. And this is what separates our wills and desires, and this is what kind of determines whether we have free will, not necessarily the external restraints placed on us by the laws of physics or science or chemistry or that sort of thing. I think perhaps that's really well explained, and I think we could take it from there if that's okay.
Yeah. So Okay, I'm glad you agree, because that means that I was kind of on the right track. So I just want to do a little bit more extrapolating, and then we can get into this sort of Frankfurter thought experiments that you probably know a ton of that are super fun, like mad scientists and stuff like that. Once people get a hold of this idea, they go crazy. So I'd love to hear it. But so let's see. So there's first order, which are your basic root desires, and then Frankfurt says, well, free will is really about the second order, because that's what's different. That's what's special. It's this wanting to want something, wishing that you could only want something or not, right? So let's just flush it out a little. So we're talking about wanting to want or wanting not to want. So let's talk about somebody who wants to lose weight sort of generally. So they could want ice cream and want not to want ice cream at the same time. And that is sort of what is unique. And he says, so that's what's unique about us, and that's got to have to do with this intuition we have that there's something free will-ish about us that sort of lower animals don't seem to have, right? So you can also, for example, let's say you hate spinach, right? So you could be in a state where you do not want spinach, but you want spinach, right? So you could also want to have a want. Like you could want to be a healthy eater, right? Like maybe you think like the vegetarian thing is perfect. Like that's me in a nutshell, right? I wish I wanted to be a vegetarian, right? Because I think that it's wrong that I love meat, because I think that the cruelty to animals, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the idea, right? But so here's the problem. If it does solve some problems with sort of, I don't know, more basic or different kinds of compatibilism, but there are still problems that remain, right? So do we want to talk about the problems, or first let's see if I explained it well enough? Does anybody... Did I explain that well, or should I try again?
I think you explained it well, but I'm waiting to hear the problems, because I think there's a lot of problems with it.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you explain some problems?
Well,
with it.
So bring on the problems.
Well, okay. So I totally agree, right? Yeah, like we have this second order thinking, right? We are not simply emotional creatures, which I think, like animals are emotional, or they're what's the word? They're instinctual, right? Like, that's my cat. He just wants or he doesn't want, or he needs to go to the bathroom or he doesn't. That's it. That's my cat. He's pretty simple. But so with second order thinking, all you're doing is introducing our ability to factor in pros and cons that apply in the future, right? Which is still just data. Like, I don't understand how it's different. It's more data. So yes, we have the ability to take in more data because we're higher level thinking creatures, but it's just data. So how is it special? How is it any different?
I totally agree. I mean, but that's like a different argument. That's almost like a Sam Harris-y kind of thing. Like he's going, hello, it's still determined. You haven't actually solved anything. But putting that aside, just dealing with sort of the inside of the argument, I think it's interesting and fun. And
It is. I just don't understand what this supposed second order level is.
Okay, so maybe Max could sort of literally sell it to us. Since Max, did you just say that you are a person who thinks this way?
I am a person who thinks this way.
All right, so to help us.
All right. So the difference between my cat, your cat, and myself is your cat is still far more heavily anchored to its instincts and its genes and that sort of thing. Whereas I think when human beings take their data, as you say, and organize it, they think far less of their genes, their body, their physiology. It's far less controlled by that, and it's far more controlled by what Helena described as the second order desires. Just thinking of things about the self. I'd also add maybe moral thinking, thinking about plans for yourself that are very divorced from just fulfilling immediate desires. So your cat, as all animals, just focus on procreation for the sake of it, mostly because they're driven by their natural instincts. Yet at the same end, of course, it's usually drawn out so they have lots of children and repopulate. However, to quote Steven Pinker, I don't want to have kids, and if my genes disagree with me, then they can go jump in a lake. So it's not necessarily about the data itself. It's about this sense in which the human being organizes the data, or the way the free will agent organizes the data, that the non-free will agent is unable to organize it.
Right, but you're assuming a free will agent is organizing it when you say that.
Well, yeah. Well, the way
it's kind of circular because you're saying you're because you have to assume that there is free will in order for that to matter. Otherwise, we're just talking about the difference between a 286 computer and my i7. Right?
Well, the definition. So just to rephrase the argument, that's the way I understood it. When Helena was describing the distinction between first and second order desires, that's the demarcation between a free will agent and a non-free will agent, because the free will agent, of course, is someone who experiences the second order desires, whereas the non-free will agent, like the cat, does not have the capacity to organize the data in that way. And I was just illustrating one of the ways, and I was just using reproduction. The cat just has immediate desires to fulfill, and that's just how it's organizing its data through those immediate fulfillments. Whereas I might think of, when I want to reproduce, maybe my religious beliefs, that God doesn't want me to have premarital sex, and that's just a huge no-no. Or the fact that maybe I just don't want to have kids, and if my genes don't like that, again, they can go jump in the lake. That, I believe, is the difference.
I get what you're saying. I just don't see the difference. I still don't see it. It's just definitional. To me, you're just sort of saying, like, we're smarter, therefore. That's what it feels like.
We're different, therefore.
Well, but
we organize differently. So
humans, you
Can
mean?
I try something? Can I try something?
Sure.
I think something that's being assumed in a lot of these conversations, and Bert and I were kind of discussing it in the side chat, that the I is assumed here, that there is an I. Right?
Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into agent causation.
Well, that's important. This is an important part of the free will conversation.
Okay.
I know.
Well, I actually have another thing that you guys were chatting about that I have a problem with. Like, what does it mean to will something? That's kind of what I'm confused about too. Like, what does it mean to even want something? Is wanting something free? Like, because I don't think it is. Like, I'm pretty sure when I desire something, I'm not choosing to desire something.
Yeah, desires and attractions, I don't think, are beliefs, or I think all those don't fit into a free category.
Exactly. So what does it mean?
What would it mean if it were free? And then we can compare ourselves to that definition and see if we fit.
Well, free from what?
Well, that's a good question, right? Because it's clearly more than just. It's got to be more than just free from.
Free from the determined.
It's got to be more than free from external crap because of this locked door thing, right? So that's not it.
So the will. Would it not be free from determined if determinism is the opposition of?
I don't understand. Explain a little bit more what you're asking.
Free would be from the determined chain, like you.
You mean like from?
I am free from the cause and effect chain is what it sounds like.
So I think the way I would define it is that we are free from just first order wants, needs, and desires, and rather we have these higher second order desires that supervene onto them and our decisions that other animals and other beings do not have this capacity.
Well, some animals do.
I fall into this.
Let's not get into the animals thing, if it's okay with you.
Well, that free will agents have that non-free will agents don't.
No, I think we need to hash this out, because I don't necessarily think free will's false. I just don't see a reason for free will to be true. And I'm having a hard time following anybody that wants to add this in there of what they're actually adding in.
Well, what do you mean by adding in?
Well, no, actually, the way
this concept, when they add that concept in, that's I'm not sure what they're actually adding into it, because it seems like everything they lay out, it works just fine in a deterministic model.
But that's what I mean. I think Max, the way he's describing free will, it's not free will at all, in my opinion. I get what he's saying. Like, we're smarter, we're beings that are able to calculate, more complex, calculations and come up with ideas that are based not only on the here and now, but also based on the people around us and our futures, right? But that's not necessarily free will to me. That's just better thinking.
That's determined by the fact that we're humans too. I mean, did you already discuss that? Because I am kind of naive in this.
Well, yes, but okay. So in terms of free will, we usually implore this kind of distinction because we think it's beneficial in terms of demarcating between two types of beings. And if you have examples of beings who have a greater order of choice and a capacity to choose than another, yes, I think that is a distinction worth having. Consider, for example, animals. I usually use animals because they're kind of the easiest ones. Not necessarily high.
So that I won't be fighting you.
I know. But consider, for example, just dogs. Consider insects, for example.
Thank you.
they just breed with no second thought to it. They don't determine, should I breed, should I not breed? But then again, human beings have great examples of people who constantly work through their biology every day. Think of the unwilling pedophile, for example. People who go to support groups just to avoid their inclination to have sex with the underage. I mean, they exist. It's not an easy battle for them. I mean, we could say that I definitely agree that they are determined not to molest kids in the sense of like the grand order of physics and chemistry, but psychologically, looking at the internal life of the pedophile, yes, that kind of internal life is very strife-ridden, filled with wants and desires of one nature superseding upon one's biology and just fighting against it. And I think that kind of person deserves to be distinguished from just an insect acting upon its biology, or dogs just mating with every boot, other dog, leg, couch.
Okay. Because I'm going to say you're totally misinterpreting what the dog is doing. But get rid of that, and let's go with the essence of what you're saying. So
it's about dominance, yo.
Yeah, and in this model, in a deterministic model, there is a separation.
Okay, but I don't want to get into that because that will sort of shift us away. I want to sort of try to clue in on what Max was saying and see if you guys agree that I've kind of interpreted it right. So he's saying that there is that regardless of whether or not it exists and to what degree in other animals, certainly we would all agree that there is this reflexive thing that people have, right? Where we can think about our thinking and want about our wantings and want about our wantings about our wantings, blah, 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 right? And so he's saying that to him, that's got to be at least part of what we mean when we say free will. That's sort of what I'm getting from him.
It could very well be, and if you mean free will in a way like that, just that we have rational minds and we make deliberations and choices, well, then I'm all board.
So that's a compatibilistic, one of the more modern compatibilistic views, right? Is that if we reconstruct what is meant by free will, then there's no problem. Even if the lower order and higher order wants are determined in terms of the physical reality, it doesn't make any difference in when it all comes down to what's really important when we talk about whether or not a thing had free will. Because
when we get into these conversations, though, that's not how, and not just here on YouTube, but just in everyday life, and It's not how we speak of free will, though. Like this makes sense to redefine it this way, and it works perfect with the model on determinism or in defining free will in this way. But I don't think we talk this way when I hear people talk, and especially religious people talking of free will. They don't speak of it in a way like this.
No, I mean that could be true or not, and I think that these modern compatibilists, like extreme Frankfurtists, or even Daniel Dennett, he has another approach. And just because the point they're trying to make it isn't mainstream, air quotes, yet, doesn't mean it's not worth looking at, or that it might not be true, or anything like that, right? So absolutely. I agree, it's sort of not the way, it seems as though it's not the way people automatically think when someone says free will versus determinism. But that doesn't mean anything, basically.
I should also add to that, like, I find this to be a very weak objection because people have folk notions about a lot of scientific things that, if you actually read the literature, do not sound like anything in reference to their folk parallel. Yeah. I mean,
no, it matters greatly. There's a difference between ignorance of the term and using it wrongly, and then just the way we speak about the term.
Yeah, but no, I think there is how
we think and feel.
Yeah, but I think there is an ignorance of it. But I think there is an ignorance of it, though, because if you look at the literature, most philosophers are compatibilists. If you look at most of the experts in philosophy of action who specialize in this, most of them are indeed compatibilists. So who are we really going to look for the definition? The people who have the folk conception, or the people who have an expertise in the field?
That is kind of
I agree. No, well, expertise. Hold on, where do you think the expertise come from?
Well, like people like Shelley Kagan and Walter Sinnott Armstrong, they're compatibilists. There are other physicalists I think I know of who are compatibilists as well.
All right,
honestly, but when I heard Daniel Dennett's name, it was just like with Sam Harris. I just was like, ugh. So Steven Pinker, I think, is a bit better. What's his position on the issue?
Well, if you're the one who thinks he's better, why don't you tell us what his position is? Because I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Do you know? I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot. That was the cutest okay I've ever heard.
Yeah, I'm glad it was effectual. Sorry.
If you don't know, then I've got another direction that I'm really eager to take this.
Go for it.
Okay. So let's just put aside this whole argument about how do regular people talk, and let's just accept sort of this Frankfurt idea, and let's look at it for its own sake and see if we can pick it apart. And I think that if you want to, it solves some of the problems that sort of the original idea of compatibilism couldn't solve, but it generates new problems just by itself, regardless of whether or not that's any good or whether or not that's what people really mean. And I'd kind of like to talk about that for a second, right? So for example, I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with an example. Let me think for a second. But I do see, it feels to me like there are some legit problems with redefining free will this way. With this, wanting to want, and whether or not, it's something about this. If the wants line up or not is sort of, by definition, whether or not you're employing free will. And that's weird. That seems to be counterintuitive, right? There's something strange there, as far as I can tell. If your will is free, hold on a second. If your will is free, only if you get to have the will that you wanted, then if you act because of the desires that you don't want to have, You're not acting freely. There you go. That's it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's a problem there.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Okay. So, Max, help us out.
With sorry.
I mean, I didn't make perfect explicit.
She said something like.
Repeat what you said, because it was good. Like the side thing was distracting as well.
Okay. All right, so Frankfurt, right, says that let's look at two pot smokers. Let's call them addicts. Let's not get into the politics of pot.
But you can't.
You don't usually get addicted to pot.
Addicted to pot.
It might be
Pot should be legalized.
Let Helena finish.
Do crack instead.
Legalize it.
I mean, we could use crack, but it's not as realistic. I don't care. Let's just drug, imaginary drug. You've got the two classic sort of drug addicts, right? And if we want to interpret it with Frankfurt's opinion, you've got the one guy or girl or child or whatever, addict number one, wants the drug and wants to want the drug, hopes he continues to want the drug, right? So he doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. That's kind of why I thought pot might be sort of a good idea, a good example, because it's easy to imagine someone who would admit that they're addicted to pot but think it's a good thing. Right, so that's why I use sort of a relatively innocuous drug.
No, what you said, drug guy is good, because I think you'll end up with people saying, well, pot's not addictive.
Yeah, right, but let's not do that. Just imaginary drug of your choice, okay?
Yeah, you're doing good.
Okay, so you've got the one type, which is like the pro-drug drug addict, okay? So let's analyze that person according to Frankfurt's new definition of free will. Okay, so he wants the drug. That's his primary desire, his base desire, right? And he doesn't want to quit, right? He wants to keep wanting. Okay, so then the other guy is somebody who would, if only he could quit, things would be so much better. So he's got his first order and his second order in conflict. So he wants the drug like the first guy, but he doesn't want the drug. So his second order is different, right? Now, of those two, which one has free will depends on the actions that occur afterwards, right? So the first guy has free will if he continues to use the drug. But the second guy only has free will if he overcomes his addiction. That seems a little strange.
All right, so I think maybe the way to Justin, Blue, I'm still getting feedback from you.
That's not Blue, you liar. Shut your mouth.
Sorry. All right.
So hold on. This is gonna fly from my head if I don't say it real quick, and then Max, you can go. So if you act right because of a desire that you don't want to have, you must be defined as not acting freely. That is where I think there's a problem. If you look at sort of morality, that would mean that infidelity gets excused, right? So infidelity, for example, right? It wouldn't be a case of someone acting on free will because of this conflict. They would be not responsible because their will was not free, because their first order and second order were in conflict, and the second order didn't win. That means the first order won, which means they were a sort of being controlled.
Right.
I think because there is a conflict, it shows that there's some free will. I think that's
the
because there's a conflict.
By Frankfurt's definition, the person who's cheating doesn't have any free will.
Or because of the conflict they do.
But Deirdre, why would the conflict mean you have free will? Which one are you going to choose?
Okay, so my response to this would just be that whenever the second order free will analyzes the desires present within the first order free will and comes to an ultimate decision, they all said second higher order desire, when it fulfills it, like when it goes on to cheat, or even when it refrains from cheating, in both situations we hold the agent to be either praiseworthy or blameworthy in committing themselves to that action. That is what holds it. So whenever
back to agency again. So you're saying there's some sort of identification that I'm missing. You're saying no, it's not just about whether or not the second order wins over the first order. It's about where does the person align himself?
Yeah, it's saying if you want things.
It's where does the person it's what the person commits himself to. So this is this is kind of what marks human beings as rational beings as well. So when I contemplate upon my actions, let's say I'm the adulterer, and I think, okay, if I continue so I have a desire to have an affair and have sex with this other person, I know the consequences if I get caught. I know that my wife will probably divorce me and be mad at me, and for good rational reason. But I know if I don't get caught, then I get a ton of sex. Now I'm going to now in the scenario where I do commit myself to the adultery, I'm committing myself to it in light of the consequences in both getting caught or not getting caught. So in terms of that, I can be held blameworthy because I've committed myself to the consequence in committing myself to said action. However, whenever the person who refrains from it can be just held as praiseworthy because in doing so he avoided having an affair. So it's about so I think the moral standing of our choices come from our commitment to the action, whereas to say we have free will just comes from the relationship between the second order desires and the first order desires. So that's something that also has to be distinguished too.
It almost sounds like you're just saying when my wants meet up with my choices, then it's free will.
Yeah, that's almost.
No.
Okay, but wait.
Yeah, it might just be a misunderstanding, please.
Hold on, we'll clarify that in just a second, because James is asking several times here to make a point or ask a question, and I want to give him a chance since he hasn't said anything yet.
I think my question is going to kind of slip in, hopefully, to what Xbox is trying to ask. It's like, I guess what this all comes down to is if we don't have this thing called free will, on any level, we're not able to make conscious choices that determine our going forward and progressing as people, then to what point is any of this religion concepts, all of which rely on us choosing something to some deity to follow, if it's all a deterministic viewpoint, or if it's all something out of our control, then how can, say, for the Christian's point of view, if God created us this way, how can he hold us accountable for something that he gave us? So this is I think this is kind of where this whole thing falls apart. Either we have this ability to choose or we don't. If we don't, then how can anybody be held accountable for anything, including you, Max, for having affairs even though you've never had sex?
Yeah, I feel so sorry for you, Max.
Yeah,
this is back to the classic incompatibilism.
So I think Max and I would.
I really hope to stay away from this because I already talked about free will in relation to my religious beliefs a lot. I just wanted this to be a purely.
We'll focus on the choice part because I don't think choice goes away whether you have free will or determinism.
Okay, wait a second. Let me say something real quick.
How that becomes relevant to me then? Forget about everything else.
Right. Yeah, the relevant.
So my turn for just a second.
Yep.
I kind of agree with Max. It would really be fun to just explore this, without reference to anything supernatural. However, I happen to know that Spackle is a Molinist, which is in some way related to compatibilism, and I want to hear that. I want to learn what that is. So let's let Spackle explain Molinism and how it is a good form of compatibilism if she wants to. And then maybe we'll be off of that topic and we can get back to sort of playing with thought experiment puzzles and stuff like that. But I really do want to know what the heck is Molinism?
All right, well, Molinism is kind of complicated to explain, but it's this idea that God has middle knowledge, and that I'm kind of skip through a lot just to make it really simple, but that God, while he foresees and foreknows every choice that we will all make, he knows every combination of choices that we would make. So, like, you know, when I said that I believe that we have limited free will, like we're allowed to move around within a certain perimeter, but we have multiple choices that we can choose within any given situation. Like when I told the story about whether or not I should have or could have or ought to have, and what I actually wanted to do, you know, which is dumping the soda on the guy's head, you know, and then I got into a fist fight. I could have opted out many different things. I think I could have walked out of the situation and taken myself out. I could have, you know, confronted him with words. I could have dumped the soda on his head. I could have thrown the first punch. You know, like I would say that there's all these options that I could have done. And so, you know, I look at what I ought to do and what I desire to do as kind of two separate things, kind of similar to what Max is saying. But I also look at, in any given choice, any given situation, I think that we actually do have multiple choices, and that God foresees all these multiple choices, but then providence dips in and out, and sometimes he sets situations up to where his will is fulfilled, and that our will can never supersede his will.
I don't want to jump on you back. Like, can you explain how you could have chosen those other things?
Yeah, please.
Also, what the heck is providence?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that too.
I mean, where are you coming from?
Well, we're in the theological zone now.
We both agree that we have choices. Even in a deterministic thing, I would have choices. But, like, say I have Coke, Pepsi, and Mountain Dew in front of me, right? I have the choice between those three, even in a deterministic view. But the one I pick is the only one I could pick, right? Where you're saying you could have picked the other two, I'm not sure how you could have picked the other two.
Yeah, and exactly, but also, Deirdre, like you're saying what you ought to do. I mean, if there was no desire to do the things that you ought to do, then there would be no ought to do, right? So there's still a desire built in. There's still a want to do something for some good reason or some bad. Like, there's still a desire there. Right?
Yeah, but I think I live so much in the gray. Like, I live so much within the I ought to do this and I want to do this. And so I actually do think that, like, I do have sometimes sort of a conflict, right? So you know, can I choose otherwise of what I desire to do? Absolutely, I've done it before.
But why? But why do you think you do that? Like, why do you think you're choosing to do something you don't want to do?
I think it's knowing what you ought to do, like
right,
knowing that there's some sort of standard to meet.
Right. So in other words, you want the consequences, right? So it's still a desire. It's a desire for consequences rather than for the immediate pleasure, but it's still desire.
Right.
So does that mean that, like, a society determines what is right, wrong, moral, immoral, that kind of thing, like Max is talking about having an affair? In some societies that might not be an issue, but in our society, sleeping with somebody else's partner is an issue. So do you take that desire at a very primal level, like animals have primal instincts, we have primal instincts, yet we impose this thought process of we shouldn't do this because of this? Is that how you are guiding your free will and your free choice, or is it you're making a conscious choice of I don't want to hurt that? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Does anybody understand what I'm trying to say?
I think I know what you're trying to say, but I should correct you on something. When I said, when I used the affair example, I was just using to illustrate consequences of having or not having the affair. I wasn't necessarily saying that was justification for why having an affair was considered moral or immoral.
Justification at all. I clearly understood what you were saying. I was just using an example of something most people would think of as immoral or wrong.
And I still, and I hate harping on it, but I'm still not understanding what this differences in the views of what being able to choose otherwise, or being able to choose something other than what you chose was ever possible. I'm not sure how that is ever possible. It seems intuitive to how you guys are saying it, but it's not on my end.
Well, I did kind of. Well, I'm not a libertarian myself, but I did kind of give the example earlier of a libertarian model. I'm not sure who it was by again, but yeah, it was one where you have multiple wills and desires, and usually they accumulate into like a mesh of decision making, and then randomly, ultimately, one will is going to come out triumphant over them. And this
randomly in that though.
just because it's random only in the sense of outcome, but it's not random in the sense of volition. So you have volition over all those particular choices, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the final choice, the one that you go with, is determined. That one is free in the sense that another one could have arisen as well.
Well, it's just like you're throwing a coin flip in the middle of it, but the coin flip is not random. It might be seemingly random or seemingly non-deterministic, but it is deterministic.
It's more like sitting down and writing. It's more like sitting down and writing out options or names or
a pros and cons list.
Or chores. It's like writing up a list of chores and throwing them in the hat. Now you wrote down all the chores you threw in the hat, but the one you pick out is going to be undeterminate. Like you're not. That's just going to be one you choose, and whichever happens is just the luck of the draw. So the draw itself was a determinate act. The choosing of which chores go in the hat is a determinate act, but the one that comes out ultimately is going to be indeterminate.
See, I don't agree with the one coming out.
Well, no, but I think yeah, that's where you're mixing terms, right? Like, because Xbox, you're saying it's still not random, and it's not random, but it is indeterminate. Like, we don't know what it will be.
So when we throw an agent, so when the agent is not determined.
So when we do something, right, and we go, well, that was unfortunate, maybe I shouldn't do that the next time. And so we've learned from our mistake, hopefully, maybe, sort of. But you ever met people that just do the same mistake over and over and over and over and over and over again?
Of course.
And they don't seem to learn from their mistakes. Now, are we just suddenly saying, well, they don't have the capacity to learn from their mistake?
Possibly. Actually, I would say possibly. I really think, like, if I were to break down how our will works, right? Like, I don't believe in free will. I think it's an illusion. I really think our brains, and we do this subconsciously all the time, so it's not like we know we're doing it, but it's like our brains have this pros and cons list, right? Like, if I do it, I'll feel good right now, and I'll be really happy, and I'll sleep good, but I'm going to hurt tomorrow, and then a week from now I'm going to regret it, right? You have all these pros and cons, and not only that, but we assign weights to them. Like I really want to do it right now, and I'm going to give it a times 10 on that one. And I'm going to hurt tomorrow, but I'm only going to give that a +2 or whatever. You know, like we do that subconsciously constantly, and we just balance it and make a decision based on, like, pros and cons. I really think that's kind of how we work. So the thing is, that's how it feels to me. I think everybody assigns weights differently, right? So there are people, like psychopaths, there are people out there that sociopaths and stuff that assign weird weights to things that the rest of us wouldn't assign, and it's just because their brains work differently. And occasionally I think I wouldn't call it random, but yeah, there are indeterminate processes that happen where every now and then we'll assign an odd weight to something.
It's the difference in the hierarchy of whether you put emotions higher in your decisions or whether you put the outcomes higher in your decisions.
The way the way you actually described it, Shar, is actually the way Robert Kane, whose model I was just quoting, describes it. I mean, it's very similar. You have a lot of wants, desires, wills, and in doing so, you kind of outweigh different weights and measures to them, and then one is going to come out. It's just that for Kane, the one that ultimately does come out is just not going to be something determinate. It's never determinate. You never know which choice you're finally going to come out with. It's just something.
Well, I would never claim we know. I would never claim that we know. I don't think we have free will, but I would never claim that I know what choices I'm going to make.
Okay, but
if that makes sense.
Right, but I think the way you were describing, you're using terms like subconscious, attaching weights and measures, willing a bunch of different things, and you want to stay up on one hand, but the other hand you want to get up early for sleep tomorrow. I actually think you might actually believe in free will, but the whole illusory part might just not be something you might actually believe in.
And you might be right, because the way you describe free will doesn't sound like free will at all to me. So when you say I believe in free will, according to you, I might.
Right, yeah, I agree on the same.
You would not know what choice they're going to make.
I don't think we ever know.
Like when you're balancing out the weights and measures, you don't know which choice you're going to come out with.
Yeah, we're not consciously thinking about it.
Make tomorrow morning. I know what kind of lunch I'm going to have. I know what I'm going to have probably for supper.
Has there ever been a time where you thought you knew it, but it didn't really come out as you expected?
No.
Yes.
When I plan shit, it happens the way I plan it, because that's
all the time.
Wow. How do you control the people around you?
Yeah.
I just ignore the people around me. Oh. They don't affect my life to that degree that they're altering what I do. I live my life according to how I want to live it.
So I could plan to, cook something in my house, but then my stove relies on electricity, and then some idiot hits a transformer, and their choice to hit the transformer, or they were determined to hit the transformer because they were an idiot. I don't know. They knocked the power out, and so my plans suddenly are affected. And
that wasn't nothing to do with my choice. That's somebody else's choice to do something stupid. So I altered my plan.
Or have you ever meant to do something, like I intend to do something, I intend to have this effect on other people, like let's rally around, guys, let's have a meeting, and then nobody cooperates, or people act differently, like your plans suddenly are thwarted by someone else's will. I'm just saying, like our plans get derailed all the time by other forces, don't they?
Well, I guess on some level that probably happens more than I probably even am aware, but generally my life day to day is I do the things I want to do during the day, and if something comes in conflict with it, I try to figure out which is the best course of action, and sometimes I will change my plan if it's something else comes up. I mean, yeah, that happens, but generally my life is I take control of what I'm going to do with my life, and that's why I asked this question, like, if there is some force that's made all of this determined, then why the religious bullshit? I mean, if there is nothing that gives us the ability to reject this God concept, then what's the point of it?
Why do we bring this up to God all the time? I'm sorry to be that guy, but I just really wanted
to... Because it has
Yeah.
ramifications as to the whole point of this free will. If there is nothing else, then the whole discussion of free will seems kind of silly.
Not all Christians, though, believe in free will.
I'm a compatibilist. I think that if I am determined to do something, even if it's by God, I have still done it of my own free will. I don't think the two are incompatible with one another.
Actually, I think if free will is an illusion, then and I don't believe we choose our beliefs, so people that believe in God, it's not like they're choosing to believe in God.
Yeah,
right?
I actually think if you bring God into the equation, free will on our end goes out the window. Maybe he has free will or something, and we could discuss that. But on our end, I think it's gone out the window.
That's kind of the point I'm trying to make, Xbox. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. This whole discussion is moot if it requires something of us or not.
Under determinism. Okay, so earlier Helena asked a question. I believe it was kind of an inquiry, as sort of what is the nuts and bolts of free will? What is it that we mean in all these situations when we invoke the word choice or the word free will? What do all these situations have in common? And I think it was Max who said that the issue is with responsibility, with agent responsibility, right? So, and I think there is another issue, and that is, could I have done otherwise? And I think that under determinist, that is, that everything that happens for a reason. Under determinism, both of those ideas can be preserved. Agent responsibility and I could have done otherwise.
Right.
We just have to tweak. We just have to understand what we mean when we say these things. So agent responsibility, I like how Max puts it. I think the way that I would describe it is that we have an abstract concept of what we are. So because of consciousness, right? Because of the capacity for introspection, we have this abstract idea of what we are. In other words, this is not a real thing, right? It's not deterministic in the same way that a billiard ball hitting another billiard ball is deterministic. It's the way that a home run would only has meaning if the abstract concept of baseball is in this world. Otherwise, there would be no home runs. It's like that.
Well,
so
it seems like on the pool example you just gave, like the pool ball, it seems like free will comes into it as if, all right, the cue ball hits the 8 ball. 8 ball goes directly, cause and effect, right to the corner pocket, right?
Right.
That would be determined. In a free will version of that, the 8 ball would have a mind of deliberating to choose once it got hit to not go to the corner pocket, but to go to the middle of the table.
No. In compatibilism, what ends up happening is that what is the meaning of the ball going into the pocket? Did you just win the game, or did it have any matter? So the meaning of that is reflected by our abstract idea of who we are. So when we get this data about the world around us, when we have instincts tugging at us and our environment tugging us one way and our emotions going the other way, the abstract idea of who we are, who we want to be, gets involved. And that is what is the agent. That is the agent causation that that is the responsibility that we're talking about. That is what gives us responsibility. So, in other words, no matter what anybody does to you, unless they can shut down your mind and have mind control over your body somehow, that's when you don't have responsibility. But as long as that abstract idea of who you are is involved, you are responsible for your actions.
Well, that's where the question comes down. Is your mind whatever? If you take physicalist view, dualist, or whatever, how you view it. It does the mind operate freely from these factors?
Well, no. It's just about so the will, right, has to sort of who was it that was in here earlier that brought up the concept of I, right?
Yeah, Bert.
Bert brought that up, and Shanna brought that up.
Yeah, like who am I, right? So the will refers to that I, the concept of the I, and that concept is an abstract concept.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to when I refer to mine.
Yeah. So that has influence that over our actions, over our final decisions. That is that second level causation.
Right. That's what I'm asking. Does that freely have that? Does it, or is it guided by deterministic forces, which determine its decisions.
Oh, it is absolutely, yeah.
Or do they freely? Does it freely just decide to do something completely other than what what the input's coming in at?
Well, once again, what we care about is whether that is responsible for itself, and it is. So that's really what matters there.
Well, and I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah.
I agree. Like, we are autonomous beings, and we have to live together, and so it doesn't matter what my meat sack does. I'm responsible for it, right? I get that, and I'm cool with that. But that doesn't mean that I have free will. It's to me, it's a different question.
I would argue that no other concept of free will is actually coherent in any way.
Well, yeah, that's what we were trying to have.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.
And I agree. Yeah.
So, but we clearly do mean something when we talk about people acting freely and people having responsibility for their actions. We clearly have, we mean something by that. That retains some sort of truth value, I believe. So what are we talking about? I think we're talking about the idea of responsibility, and the other thing is, I think we mean that. Hey, take care, Max. Damn it! I wish you could have chimed in there. But the other concept too is we could have done otherwise, right? I like Daniel Dennett's solution to this, and that is that when we say that we could have done otherwise, what we mean is that sort of if we were put in a variety of very similar situations, the outcome will be indicative of our character, of who we are.
We were in identical situations.
Pardon me?
See, we were rewinding it to identical situations.
Two identical situations will always result in the same thing.
That's where the dispute was. That's where our dispute on what free will was coming from.
Right.
Someone that holds the free will says that yes, if you rewind it, I could choose something differently, and I don't see how that concept comes in there.
Yeah, I agree, right? Because that means you're sort of acting irrationally. So I agree with that. I think that, but I don't think that that's what we really mean by could have done otherwise. It's so Daniel Dennett gives this example of like a pro golfer making a putt. Now we know that he's great at golf, but he misses the putt. And if you put him in the exact same situation, he will always miss that putt. It doesn't matter how good he is in that exact same situation. But if you allow him to do it again, now, the situation's pretty much exactly the same. The wind's still the same, the sun's still in the same place. It's, 30 seconds have passed. Well, now he makes it. Why? Because he has the skill to actually make that putt. And if he were to, do that, if he were to do that 100 times, he would probably get it 95 times out of 100, right? And that is indicative of his character. And I think that when we say we could have done otherwise, that's what we mean. That being put in a similar situation, not exactly the same situation, but a similar situation, we could have accomplished something because we have the skill for it.
Yeah, but that's the total opposite of what people generally mean by free will.
I don't think we mean that.
Well, that's why our dispute was coming up. That's maybe intentionally they mean something different, but this is how they explain it.
I mean, the general position on free will is that you have free will because in an identical environment, and you being the same person with the same experiences up till that point, your choices are not constrained to one thing. That's libertarian free will.
Yes. I think that's incoherent.
Right, but that's libertarian free will.
Yeah. I would go compatibilist approach all the way. I think that's the only one that actually makes sense.
And I don't think compatibilism basically redefines free will to be determinism.
Yes, while keeping sort of the concept of agent responsibility.
Right, consciousness. What's the difference between us and a toaster? We're conscious.
So the gentleman that shut up San Bernardino today, he had no choice to do otherwise.
I think there were 3 of them.
No choice to do otherwise.
No, he had other choices. But what played out was determined, sure.
What played out was indicative of their character.
Yeah, he had other choices
but they weren't suitable for him.
Right.
He
would have never chosen otherwise.
Yeah, he chose the choice suitable for him, and or her, because I think there was a woman.
And he couldn't have chosen otherwise.
Right.
But why do we put him in jail?
Because he's dangerous. Because.
Well, yeah, but who's to say that here comes the question.
So there's no hope for reform then, right?
No,
retribution.
No, there is.
There is hope for
reform. We have rational minds, right? Those even working on a deterministic causal chain, it can still be reformed, and the Reformation is just as determined.
Yeah, you change
exactly.
the environment.
We were all reformed. Think about how stupid you were when you were 16 years old. Aren't you much smarter now?
You can't even. Okay, you can choose to go to a therapist, and they can teach you cognitive therapy tools.
No,
but you can choose to not.
Yes, we're not arguing about choice.
Right. But the choice is based on your desire to improve yourself.
The choices are presented to you. They're these choices. I wouldn't say come internally, out of nowhere from you.
Yeah, like you're.
Yeah, but you do have multiple choices. Like you can't just say you only have one venue. You can only go one way.
No, but when do you go?
We're not saying that. Yeah.
But yes, you have choices, but you're going to choose the thing that you desire most, right? The thing that makes you a better person, that makes you happy in the now, whatever it is, whatever factors in, you're going to choose a certain thing based on everything your brain has taken in, all the inputs. Like, how could you choose otherwise?
But yeah, that's what we're asking. Yeah. You do seem to like intuitively put forth that you could choose otherwise. Like, even in that shooting, I'm not sure how he could have chosen otherwise. Hindsight, yes. With the new information that you have in the future, you can look back and say, yeah, there were all these other things that I could have done.
Yeah, because I didn't know better at the time.
Right. But at the time, how could you ever choose something different?
Yeah, the whole idea is if these terrible people could have done otherwise, they would be different people. It would take another person to do otherwise, and I think we intuitively know that if they were put in that situation, in a slightly different situation, but sort of given the same choice, they would most likely still do it.
Right.
And for the people who are not responsible, we know that if we put them in the same situation, but slightly different, we know that, hey, they won't do that.
Here might be an easier way. If you isolate a choice from all your prior experiences and from all outside factors, if you isolate a choice, then I can kind of see what you're saying, that you could pick between these two. But we don't live in a world with isolated choices like that, or isolated from our experience.
Right. So you can actually build your desires, can you not?
Over time, sure.
Yeah.
So you can change the way you think, and like the coping skills that you naturally have, you can add to and borrow from other people or relearn, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yes, but only if you want to make the steps along the way.
Right, and that want and desire to make those steps and those changes come. I would put that it's a determined factor of you wanting to make those changes.
Yeah, I kind of agree.
You have experiences and things like that, and either you're not liking how things are going, and you decide to change it. So we're not removing decisions of choices or anything like that.
A spin-off of a fighting game series called...
Your mic is really muffled.
Actually, he's picking up the TV.
Yeah, might be.
Why couldn't there be why couldn't there be something outside our physical body, and or something that exists outside the environment that influences our actions?
Oh, it absolutely can be.
How? In what sense?
What do you mean? So
There could be. I don't know how we would ever know that, but it sure could be.
But if that was true,
mm-hmm.
then determinism would be false.
Well, determinism is different from random too, right? Like, so I don't, and determinism, so, well, maybe not determinism. Okay, just because we don't know what the outcome will be doesn't mean it isn't determined. It doesn't mean that it isn't going to happen the way physics makes it happen, right?
Absolutely true. People confuse that all the time.
Yeah.
I can take a very simple mechanical system, make a couple of changes to it, and ask somebody who's very familiar with that system what's going to happen. Their lack of knowledge doesn't mean the outcome is not determined. People say that all the time.
Right.
But the question I would ask is, if there is something which could exist outside of our physical body, isn't it possible then that if that is true and it influences our physical body, well then determinism is false?
Explain that out, because are you meaning it would be attached to us in a way? Because just like my door slamming and hitting me in the face,
right,
that doesn't mean determinism isn't false. So you've got to be meaning something a little different.
No, in the classical view of libertarian free will is that if you clone somebody, like on an atomic scale, that you made the exact same person and you ran them through the exact same environment, they would make the exact same decisions all the time. That's classical determinism.
Yeah, but that's missing a few factors. That's missing time and location, right? Like
no, I said in the exact same environment. Like you rewound back the time, and you took out you and you put in your identical clone and played it forward.
Fair enough.
Okay. Yeah. In that instance, they play out the exact same way. Yeah.
No,
that's exactly the same environment and completely different.
Well, no, that's what he's saying. You run back time, and if you run back time and it's the exact same environment,
it's like
have
what
the
I
exact
said.
same
If you
molecules,
rewound
they
time,
have the exact same experiences, then it's going to run through exactly the same scenario as the clone.
Right. But now let's put in that situation that there exists something outside of the physical body which influences the actions of.
Hang on, James. Hang on.
In that case, it wouldn't necessarily follow that the physical body would make the exact same actions.
Cliff, are you proposing something metaphysical?
Yes, outside of the physical body.
You're proposing something.
Hold on.
What do you mean?
Because you're adding an indeterminate factor into it.
You're adding supernatural to it. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, supernatural, not super. Outside the physical body is one thing, but supernatural or not.
You don't even need to go supernatural. You could go social, or you could go like for instance, they've done brain studies and neglect causes one person's brain to function one way versus another, right? Like you could say, oh, there's some determinism there, but that outside force is what affected it.
No, that's why I think he's saying the other thing, because there's slight differences once you start talking about people. Yes, we all have brains, but they're all different enough, even if they look identical, to react different to different.
And
things.
actually,
Plus
I have
the time and the environment are different. Hang on just a second, Shar. On what you're saying with when you add something outside of our body, metaphysical or not, you're adding an indeterminate factor, right? Now, if something was outside of my body and metaphysical, but was just as determined as I'm saying the rest of the universe works, then I've removed it being an indeterminate factor, and now it's a determinate factor, so everything still relies on determinism.
Yes, that is the key question. Is it principled? In other words, does it follow certain principles in interacting with the rest of us? This metaphysical component.
Right. So essentially, okay, right. So what I'm not postulating anything about the nature of this thing. I'm just saying it exists. If it exists, it necessarily doesn't follow that the same physical body in the same physical situation would do the same thing, because there's no constraint that this thing, which is influencing your body, is necessarily being made the same.
If the external thing was identical to the first, say you have the original that goes through and then you have the clone that goes through, if the external thing is identical in both scenarios, then yes, it runs through exactly the same way every time.
Why, that doesn't follow. You're not making the external thing, the whatever you want to call that. You're not constraining that, because again, classical determinism just
I am
says,
constraining it. That's what I'm saying. I am constraining it. It would have to be the identical determined thing as well.
right.
If you make it indeterminate, then yes, then
right. So why can't you just postulate that? Like, why can't that be? Is the question. Like, that's how libertarian free will exists. It says there is something outside of the physical body which is not constrained by either the physical body or the environment, and that is what allows an identical physical being in an identical physical environment to make more than one constrained choice.
Is determinism only applied to materialism? Is it a purely materialistic concept?
They were talking about a physicalist connection earlier. I wouldn't necessarily follow on.
Determinism is, from a theological standpoint, Calvinism is deterministic. So you can apply it to metaphysical.
Right. So you don't really escape that by adding a second substance.
Right, Cliff. The subject would still be determined, but you would have the indeterminate factor, right? So yes, free will exists in the universe at that point, but the subject would still be determined.
So to me, that would be no different than cloning somebody, but omitting a part of their brain, and obviously they're going to act a different way. So you have omitted cloning a substance of them that determines them.
Right. And this is why I said earlier that maybe God posited could have free will. Maybe there's a way that works, but it still wouldn't change us being determined.
No, there's a difference, right? So when you say if you take out a part of someone's brain is basically controlled by essentially the physical nature of the brain as influenced by the environment. What I'm saying is, why cannot there be something outside of the individual who interacts with the individual but isn't constrained at all by the environment, isn't influenced at all by the environment?
So you're proposing a God or some supernatural force.
Well, yeah, as a thought experiment, yeah. That's why I don't think we're arguing against a soul or a God or whatever it is. But I still think the subject the way it would play out, the subject would still be determined.
Why? This thing is not at all influenced by the environment.
Right, so the thing itself, the thing you're talking about that's not influenced, right, it may have free will. It's not influenced by anything, not constrained by anything.
And it can influence your
action. But if it influences me, then the influence itself was from that point on is determined, everything.
I don't get how you're getting determined, because it's not constrained by the environment. Like,
I'm not talking about the thing itself. The thing itself may have free will.
Well, then it's determinate in that it's based around the actions of this being, and then you have the affecting of the environment going beyond that. But
right, it would be the determining factor.
Yeah.
Right, it would be the determining factor. But does that mean determinism is true, or does that go outside of the definition?
Right, in the exact same physical environment, the exact same physical being, makes different choices.
Well, only if you go to jump into that it's the creator of all things and all that, because then it's set up a deterministic universe, no matter how you look at it.
No, but I'm just saying, imagine a situation in the future where we can actually clone people and run them through different situations, and when we clone people exactly and we run them through different situations, they do not make the same choices in the exact identical environments and the exact physical bodies. Couldn't this simply be explained by the fact that there is something external to that which isn't constrained by either one of them, and that influences?
One's time travel, but I think time travel is impossible. I think it runs into all kinds of problems. You could run the exact same environments, but you're never going to get the exact same moments.
Right, but
so
if we did.
Here's an example of where environments will never be the same, right? So, like with computers, right? You can have two identical computers. They were built in the same place at the same time, and they come out the same. You run them for a month, and they behave completely differently, even if you treat them the same. And part of this has to do with alpha particles and all that stuff coming from the sun. I don't know what, right? There's stuff shooting around all over the place, quantum physics, all these fun things. The computers behave differently because their hard drives and their memory and everything is affected by these particles. So I don't see how our brains would be immune to that same effect, right? So there could be things like that affect us. There can be I mean, if you're not in the exact same place in the exact same time from the exact same plate, like if your clone can't stand in the exact same spot that you're standing, you can't have the same experience, right? It just won't happen. So
Right.
so obviously there are environmental factors that change us, right? Depending on where we are, what we do, what's hitting us, what's not. All these things matter.
You would have to devise a thought experiment of where, okay, one universe is created and it runs through this, and then in the future we've figured out how to destroy it all, but make ourselves come back, and the other universe takes its place, and everything plays through.
We don't need to go that
because
far.
As soon as you have two universes, then you can't rule out that one's affecting the other by not being in the same time and in the same place.
You don't need to go that far. There are theories of time which allow you to do that without blowing up the universe. I'm just saying, in the situation where we can actually go back in time and replace a person with an identical clone, so they do run out the same identical environment, and they make different choices, can't you simply say that that is due to something external to the physical body, which is not constrained by the environment?
No, because you haven't cloned the person. That's not a real clone, because there's substance B that is a part of that person and hasn't been cloned.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I disagree with that. I think you probably could clone a person.
Yeah, you'd have to clone them. Experience and everything would have to be.
Yeah, you'd have to clone their brain. Their
Hold on, not just their mental experience, but their physical experience as well.
Yeah.
Yes, they're the exact same person physically, absolutely, down to the exact however far you want to break this down, right down to the quarks, right down to the arrangements of everything in the brain. That's the exact same person. You take that and you exchange that with the other person, but they don't make the same choices. And you say they don't make the same choices because there's something external to the body which is influencing it, which is not constrained by the environment.
So then the person, in this scenario, the person does not equal to just the physical components, correct?
Yes.
The person's equal to the physical components plus this metaphysical substance. Therefore, cloning them alone is not a sufficient clone, right? We're missing something.
Yeah, so I would say
not the same person.
But here's what you'd be missing, though, is the indeterminate factor that he's positing that was there to begin with.
Right. That's why I'm saying that the exact same physical person in the exact same physical environment doesn't necessitate that the same choices have to be made.
I think they would, though.
I don't think determinism is not. I don't think it's relegated to just the physical world, right? You can apply it to metaphysical ideas because they're principled, right? They act, supernatural beings act in a particular way according to their metaphysical natures.
Well, it seems like you're positing a free will agent to prove a free will agent.
I'm saying, isn't that possible?
If we can roll back time and prove that it is, that would be super awesome. But it doesn't seem likely to me at all.
No, I'm not saying we can do it. I don't think we can ever do it. There's nothing that says that we will ever be able to do it. I'm just saying if we did do that and that happened, wouldn't that be one of the explanations for why it could happen?
Right. He's talking about what he's arguing against is what Dex was saying about the libertarian free will being absurd. And he's given a scenario where I think there is a fuzziness where I almost have to agree with you. Like,
oh sure, no, I agree. If we could do the experiment and that's what happened, yeah, I would agree that that's bizarre, and I would think there would have to be something outside the physical world to make that happen.
Well, but
So
your
can I
options
interject
are.
for just a second? I really apologize over and over and over. Could somebody briefly, I've been gone this whole time, sort of give me an idea of what the experiment is and sort of what the current argument is about?
Taking a clone and sending them back to relive my life.
yeah, like maybe Cliff can explain it because we were talking about libertarian free will got brought up, and Cliff devised a thought experiment to show how a scenario could play out where libertarian free will were the case.
Okay.
Right.
And Dex is on the other side of that.
Okay, what's the thought experiment that could make it so that libertarian free will might be the case?
Okay, I actually have two. I never got to the second one yet. We're only at stage one yet. So the first explanation was that libertarian free will was incoherent. And I said, okay, let's take the exact same physical body of a person. Let's put him, hypothetically, in the exact same physical past in the same environment and the exact same physical time.
Okay, well,
Now,
why does it have to be a different body? Why can't it be the exact same body in the exact same place in the exact same universe?
Experiences. You would have to accumulate the exact same experiences.
Yeah, and it accumulates the exact same experiences.
right, so you could, like,
when you cloned it, you cloned its experiences, its mental, physical, every experience that it had.
Why are we positing a clone? Why can't we just reverse things with that same person?
Well, I couldn't take Xbox and bring
You'd
them
need
back.
the first person as a control, wouldn't you?
Right, hold on, because as soon as you reverse it, you're just replaying the exact same time again.
Yeah.
And if you take me from the future and put me back in the past, well, then you haven't. I have new experiences beyond that starting point.
Yeah.
So
I guess I interrupted too soon. So let me just continue.
Yeah.
You're saying we need a clone for some reason, and let me go ahead and hear the rest of the experiment.
Yeah, well, I need a clone for ethical reasons. I'm an ethical scientist, so I wouldn't.
Okay.
That's a silly question.
There's no ethical problem with reversing time, of course.
Look, this is an absurd
the actual
experiment.
subject. You don't want to be mean to him.
Yeah, that would not be nice. Okay.
No. Okay. So really, keep going.
Oh wait, too. He's not reversing time. He's just taking the clone back in time and removing me from the equation and putting my clone in place.
Yeah, I can travel in time. I'm awesome like that. So anyway, in this situation, I go back and do this, and I observe that X doesn't actually make the same choices. He actually lives out a different life. And couldn't I posit that there is some external agent which is not physical and which is not constrained by the environment, and that is influencing his actions, and that is why he doesn't live out the same life?
The devil made me do it.
No.
I was going for Jesus.
I had to be contrary.
Now, is that Jesus or Lard Thunder and Jesus? Sorry, he's a newfie. He understands that sort of thing.
I don't see why. You're saying that. Let me see if this is right. You're saying that the fact that it's a clone of Xbox and not Xbox himself, and that clone presumably does something different, supports what exactly? I'm not quite following why it has to be a clone and what. And
Libertarian free will is what it supports.
no, I understand it's designed to support libertarian free will, but are you supporting libertarian free will by adding variables that weren't in the original world?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No. They were there to begin with. Like, at least I'll explain how I understand the scenario is. I live out my life, and it seems determined, but all the while there's this external force that's influencing me into doing different things, right? Okay, now in the future, we've learned how to do the time travel and the cloning, and they've cloned my exact experiences up to age 2, whatever, and everything. We jump back in time. He's able to instantly transport the original me out of time and the new one into the clone's position. Now this external force is still there, but it's going to influence me different this time as I grow up.
Something
because
feels
it's not
fishy.
Feels
fishy, just intuitively, about this insistence that instead of actually just rewinding Xbox, you want to insert a clone of Xbox. It seems like that's so that you can allow.
Here, I could throw it out as a scenario where you just rewind it.
Yeah, okay.
Is the external force in this situation isn't constrained by time or matter or space or anything. It's not constrained by any of it. So you let me live out my life, and I live it out a certain way, become a stockbroker, all this stuff. And grow out 90 years old and die. Now you reverse time. The external entity hasn't shifted at all in this reversal of time. Now this external, we start time again. This external entity influences me to live out a different life, and I die at 23 instead, and I never get a job. And
okay, and so you want to say that somehow that's not determined?
Right, because this outside influence was the thing that guided me, and it was not constrained by anything determined.
So wouldn't we conclude that
like a god or something like that?
Right, sure.
No, it's far worse.
I mean, I don't know what to do with that, right? You're just saying, let's figure out a way to claim we're rewinding time and claim that we're rerunning the universe in the exact same way, except that we really won't.
No, well, I mean, everything plays out the same. It's this external entity that's not constrained by any of this.
But
what does that mean?
We often have competing desires, sort of like what Max was saying. Like sometimes it's social harmony or self-interest or some other thing. What if, for whatever reason, that competing desire won out and you chose differently?
Yeah, so that's the real question.
That's only if those are indeterminate as well. But
I'm trying to get it off the God thing and back onto something that's more.
Yeah, but you would have to show how these things are indeterminate and not determined. These other forces, these social forces, or other people.
But even if they're determined, you could choose differently for social harmony than you would for self-interest.
No, that's what we're asking you. How do you get to that? You could choose something differently than what you chose.
Which desire wins out, I guess? Which one do you put as most important?
Right. Well, how would that ever shift? If everything was determined, how would your desire ever shift to something else?
Because she believes in the libertarian concept that she can.
But she was saying, at least in this scenario, that we're removing any type of God or force like that. These are going to be social forces and environmental forces.
And your self-interest, and some people want change, some people want everything to stay the same, all sorts of things.
But that sort of sounds like you have the ability to make these different things happen. So you don't believe in determinism.
Well, that comes to it. Your desire. Are you freely choosing your desire? Like if you desired a cake right now, are you just freely? Like where does that desire come from in your view?
So I could desire ice cream, but I can't choose which ice cream I prefer to like. So I desire ice cream.
Like, hold on, just the desire. Just like when you say you could desire ice cream. Like, are you choosing to desire ice cream, or do you think?
I think you don't choose your desires. I think they do happen to you. Okay. But I think you can start to change your desire. Like I could condition myself to decide I don't want ice cream anymore. I want vegetables. I think it's possible.
Yeah, there's nothing in a deterministic view that you couldn't do the same.
Right, but is that desire free? When you say I want to make myself now start to desire vegetables, is that desire a free desire? Or is that also constrained by your nature?
Well, that goes back to what I think, what we want, what we desire, and what we ought to do.
But I'm still.
I ought to eat vegetables, but maybe I want to eat ice cream.
Right, but yeah, your nature, your body will desire something rather than what your mind wants. But like, I'm still like I'm having a hard time grasping this of that being able to choose otherwise. If I desired ice cream right now, right, I didn't choose to desire the ice cream.
Right.
I don't.
And how could I have ever, if I replayed this, how at that moment could I have ever decided to desire cake instead of ice cream?
Ice cream trader.
I'm still
making me hungry.
I'm still confused.
Hold on, Sharsh. If she can respond to that.
Yeah.
Because I'm having a hard time grasping.
You can desire the ice cream, but you can choose to ignore that desire, or you can go drive down to Ben & Jerry's and get the ice cream.
Right.
Why would
that
you choose? Why would you choose?
It's always there. Like even in deterministic, you don't have to have free will to have choice. But like the desire itself.
So why would
when you have the desire itself, like that's what I'm not grasping is how could I choose?
Your desire.
Let me clear the question.
Your desires just happen to you.
I know, but how could I choose to desire something other than what my desire is?
Okay. You can actually introduce a different type of thinking. Like cognitive therapy, for instance, would present to you different ways of thinking than maybe you naturally would, and then you might actually desire to respond differently to a situation because you've added coping skills. So you can actually build upon what you already have. We all have a natural.
No, hold on. Over time, I could change my desires, but this isn't the question. The question is, in that moment when I desired ice cream, you're saying if I replayed time, that I could actually desire cake instead of ice cream in that moment.
Yeah. So you could choose what you ought to do as opposed to what you desire to do.
I'm still not talking about the choice, because like I'm saying, we actually don't have a disagreement there. We don't, from our view, you don't have to have free will or anything else imposed to have a choice. It keeps going back to that, but when you go into determinism, choice isn't eliminated.
So here's something. I think that Frankfurt was trying to say, you know how compatibilists have, like, this is my opinion, so maybe I shouldn't say but it seems like compatibilists have like two sort of alternatives to try to find their wiggle room, right? One of them is let's redefine free will, and one of them is something's wrong with these two premises. They're not actually, it's not an either or thing, right? So I feel kind of like Frankfurt is kind of in the middle, but one thing that I think that he does really call into question is the idea that there's something incorrect about getting hung up on should have done otherwise or could have done otherwise. That is really not what is at base distinguishing free will from some other thing, right? So I mean, he does that with his little thought experiments and stories and things like that, right? He shows, like, you have the mad scientist, those kinds of things, where it just sort of really shows that it's really not about whether or not you could have done otherwise. That is just missing the mark entirely. And so I think that is a pretty good way. I mean, I don't quite see what the point of it is, but I think that has to do with the fact that I haven't studied anything about moral implications yet, right? But I do think that this point that Frankfurt, I think, made and Dennett made is an important one. That this could have done otherwise business is just really a bunch of brouhaha, and in fact, we really don't decide somebody's moral responsibility based on whether or not they could have done otherwise. That's kind of a red herring in a lot of ways. And so we shouldn't think that is the most important thing to help us decide whether or not free will exists, or whether or not free will it could exist at the same time that determinism exists, or whether or not determinism sort of makes moral responsibility a problem.
Right. It's a red herring when someone throws out that in a deterministic worldview there'd be no responsibility kind of thing.
I agree too.
I find it really hard to hold someone responsible if they can't do otherwise.
Well, exactly. I mean,
well, responsible how, though?
I asked about half an hour ago.
Because it's indicative of their character. That's what matters. And when it comes to they could have done otherwise, we have to understand that there is no second chances in reality, right? So this whole concept of doing otherwise never actually exists. What we mean is that it is not indicative of our character or maybe our skill level or whatever that we're talking. It is not indicative of what we are if we do something and we go, ah, damn it, I could have done better. It means that sort of the odds were against us at that moment, that this is not in any way representative of what we are.
Right, and what would it matter if, what would it mean to hold someone responsible? You brought up the shooting thing earlier, Spectre. Like, if someone did this shooting, in what way do you mean hold them responsible? As if it was guaranteed they would never do anything like that again?
That's not actually strictly true. I mean, the law doesn't work like that, and we certainly don't work like that. Like, imagine that I go over to X's house.
Yeah, that's the distinction I was trying to draw. Please.
I mean, before we jump into the law, and Cliff, can you just hold on to that and not lose it so we can get to it in a second? Because I think the law part is really critical. But I just want to try to explain what I was trying to say before by, I just Googled, like, Frankfurt puzzle, and I came up with one. So I think this might be a classic one, and it kind of illustrates this idea that could have done otherwise is just completely misses the mark. So let me just read it out, and then after that we can go into sort of how does the law really operate and what are the assumptions under the law, and if determinism is true, does that mean we should change the laws and all that crap? But let's go through this first, if that's okay with you guys.
Did you do otherwise, Helena, than read this out?
It's going to be dependent on external forces. Is it okay with you guys if I read it out?
I think we could convince you.
I do want to hear it.
I think goals affect this too. By the way,
all right, I'm going to read it, and then after that I'll mute. So okay, so Jones hates Smith and decides, in full possession of his faculties, to murder him. Meanwhile, a nefarious neurosurgeon, this is what I love about Frankfurt, right, is that all of his stuff have these evil surgeons and things. So, okay, a nefarious neurosurgeon, Black, who also wants Smith dead, has implanted something in Jones's brain, just in case Jones changes his mind, or like Jones chickens out, right?
Well, this is some serious fucking intrigue here.
Okay,
man.
this is really cool. I love these. All right, so now, Black, that's the neurosurgeon, by pushing a special button, can put Jones back on his murderous track. Now, in the event that Black does not have to intervene, Jones will do the deed all on his own, right? So Jones hates Smith and decides to murder him. However, Black has implanted a secret device so that if Jones changes his mind, all of that gets overridden. So that means, literally, Jones could not do otherwise. Right? Now, where is the moral responsibility? If Jones changes his mind and the evil scientist flicks his switch and Jones actually kills him.
Possibly be held responsible. There was an outside agent.
That's right.
Yeah, the moral culpability would be shifted in that.
That's right. The guy pushing the button is responsible.
That's right. So it's really, so this points to, I think, this whole agency's selfness and all that, right? Because it's really not about whether or not the person in question could have done otherwise. It's really more about something else, right? Because here's a situation where clearly he can't have done otherwise. But if he wanted to kill him and the evil scientist didn't have to flick the switch, then we blame him. But if he changed his mind but killed him anyway because of the evil scientist, we don't blame him.
Unless we don't know.
Congratulations, you now understand Calvinism, except you do blame him anyway.
No, I don't.
I
don't. But I have a really bizarre, radical view. But it's, I mean, I'm modifying it. I'm in the midst of change.
But that's exactly why I don't agree with the death penalty, and I don't think we should treat prisoners poorly.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, let's just go on a rant real quick, mutually.
Well, because as much as a neuroscientist might put something in your brain, your parents and the way they raise you, and the way you've been treated in school, and your peers, and
make a great Canadian.
Finance.
No, I mean,
so many factors.
Questionable, but nonetheless could be, right? And especially could be if determinism is true, right?
Well, I have one on that, Helena, and to go with your experiment too, is along the causal chain of responsibility, right? In a deterministic universe, the scientist that pushed the button and did the implanting was determined to do that as well. So how do you hold him culpable? Why not move to the next link in the chain, and the next link, and the next link, and the next link, and the next link?
I mean, yes, I agree. I mean, I
So
completely agree.
where
But the point of the thought experiment, though, is I don't want to lose sight of the point of the thought experiment.
No, I'm sticking with it.
Which is precisely this. This issue that we are fighting about appears at first glance to really be about whether or not the person could have done otherwise. But in fact, that's not what's at the bottom. Because there are circumstances where clearly the person couldn't have done otherwise, and yet we still blame him based on, and as for Frankfurt, it's based on this double need thing, this special ability that we have to want things.
I'm saying the scientist couldn't have done otherwise either.
Yeah, I mean, that's a completely different question.
Well, no, that's what I'm. That's exactly what I'm saying. Is if what you're saying is true, that it's not about what you could do otherwise, then where do you stop the causal chain, and why do you stop it at that certain point?
You blame the guy
you blame the agent.
Whoever started the causal agent is to blame. So,
yeah, I mean that's right, James.
It all go back to God.
It points to the agent being more important than sort of the agent's circumstances, right? But just so I can rant for a second, and Shar, maybe you can rant with me. I'm kind of a mind that is sort of an optimistic determinist, sort of like Harris, right? That whereas if it is true that determinism is true, and therefore free will doesn't exist, then when we look at criminals, we should not blame them. There is no such thing as evil, right? So it doesn't mean that we have to change our laws, but experience does seem to show that as science gets better, and we become determinism is true.
Yeah.
As science gets better, and we become more and more able to understand that epilepsy is not witchcraft and stuff like that. That at least in principle, that would be true of sort of all maladaptive behaviors. And if we presume that is true, and we presume that determinism is true, and free will doesn't exist, it will help us to treat humans better, regardless of what they've done. So,
precisely.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree about.
Yeah, and so
this is sorry, Helen. This was the point I was trying to raise with Max.
Okay.
If this is all something we've imposed upon that primal instinct, like we all have, if we are all ultimately just animals responding to instinct, and then we put this layer of social construct on top of it, how can we determine that acting on what is a natural thing is wrong, but the imposition of everything on top of it is the correct way, other than the fact that society deems these things right and wrong, or you should live like this to live in a social community?
No, they do, but it's not a convention of the mind. It's not just made up rules. And don't mix the law with the morality of the situation.
I'm not doing that. I'm asking, am I missing? Am I putting those thoughts together correctly? If we are just run by instinct with a social construct on top of it, I'm not claiming any morality, because not every society has the same sets of laws.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, in general, do we really have these feelings, but we act the way society gives us a framework to live in? Does that make any sense?
I think we build the society's framework to live in. I don't think it gives it.
Well, I agree with you, and that's
okay. Let's make sure I clarify what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Helena.
Yeah.
It seems to me that under determinism, empathy really thrives because you're able to conceive of pretty much any any factor for a person's actions.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, it doesn't mean that punishment is ineffective, but it does mean that blame, wrath, hate, vindictive things are ineffective, right?
Yeah.
All right, and
Yeah,
so
no, that's why I wholeheartedly agree, because that's why I always have a problem with it being called crime and punishment, and us going through the punishment. I don't think the blame, and it's what I was alluding to earlier when I said about the shooting and us putting someone in jail for that and holding them responsible, in my view, as a punishment, it is wrong, and it's a
Yes, but
mistake.
remember why we do that, though. Remember why we do that.
Hold on. I know. Hold on. I don't think we shouldn't do that. I think as a punishment, this is a reason. I'm saying if it was a guarantee that they were never going to do this again, right? Then it's rehabilitation that is what matters, not the punishment.
You can offer rehabilitation, but if the person doesn't want it, they don't want it. They have to participate in it.
Part of the reason why the state took on the role of punisher, okay, is that, and we saw this again in the rise of the Italian city-states in the Renaissance, where in the absence of the state acting as not just a keeper of order, but a righter of wrongs, what you had was a vendetta culture that was rising up and wiping out entire families. So part of the compact of, and it began there in many ways, part of the compact of the state removing the prerogative of the vendetta was saying, listen, in return for you giving up your right of vendetta, we will ensure that not only is order kept, but that a certain degree of retribution will be involved in dealing with crimes. And that was part of the reason why punishment was implemented on a pragmatic scale, not leaving aside the whole. And I'm sorry, but often it was driven by biblical notions of crime and punishment. But leaving that aside, on a pragmatic scale, that's why we see a degree of punishment implemented.
Yep. Yeah. Whether it's right or wrong, we still want to hurt those that wrong us.
Yeah, but X is saying under determinism, if it was fully accepted, that wouldn't exist because people wouldn't have those. You wouldn't have those desires, right?
Oh, sure. If every single human being accepted it, you're absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's how I was getting. I don't disagree with what you said either.
Every single human being accepted. Good luck with that.
No, that's what we're talking about. Is a culture shift of thinking. That's exactly what we were.
If it's one thing I've learned about human beings by watching you strange shaved apes, it's that not all of you can be made to agree on anything, with the possible exception of the fact that you need to breathe and pee once in a while.
Yeah. Well, we just need a vast majority of it. That's why I say like a culture shift, a huge. It would have to be a huge culture shift. Don't get me wrong. It couldn't just be the majority of my town and. I think even just the United States. I mean, I
think you're going to need a biological change, not just a. Because as much as a lot of people don't like this, much of our baseline morality emerges out of the requirements of our morphology and our physiology. Now we've built a number of higher tiers of morality on top of that. But that's the baseline. That's the first layer of our morality, is attached directly to our morphology and our physiology and the needs expanded therefrom.
And the desire for retribution is driven by emotion, right?
And that's the thing is, and that's I say maybe it's just with my view, and maybe I'm weird, and a couple people in here know why, but that the level of that is hard for me to understand. Like the level of retribution or revenge doesn't seem to be the same when I think about it as the way a lot of other people react to it. Like, I mean, some people are just instantly, you stepped on my foot, I want to fucking kill you.
Yeah.
And some people are a little nicer about it, but they still hold this seed inside of them where that's.
By holding a grudge, you stepped on my foot.
Right, yeah, and I don't get that. I don't understand it.
They're just determined. That's it.
I don't deny it. I don't deny it happened.
I mean that more sincerely than it sounds, right?
Is determinism and free will mutually exclusive?
Yeah. Does everybody here agree with the sort of central premise? I mean, anyone who knows that they're a compatibilist would clearly say no. But for the people who haven't sort of self-identified, do you agree with the following? If determinism is true, then free will is false, or then we do not have free will, or then free will does not exist. Do you agree?
In a libertarian sense, yeah.
Yeah, libertarians agree. And so, Cliff, did you just say yes, you agree?
I said in a libertarian sense, yeah.
Yeah,
But
do you hold a libertarian? Do you hold
No.
to a libertarian? No, okay. So what do you think?
Are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah, do you think that they're incompatible? Cliff.
Well, see again. I mean, it depends on how you're going to define free will. They're incompatible if you take a free will definition of a libertarian. They're not incompatible if you take a free will definition of a compatibilist. Like all they do is just redefine the terms.
That's right. I mean,
there's nothing more
at least these newfangled ones are doing that for sure, redefining the terms.
I disagree. Libertarians don't have a definition to begin with. They don't have a coherent definition to begin with.
Right. Yeah, I was actually going to say it's kind of similar, but I think they are compatible. I don't think one rules out they're exclusive by any means, because I don't think there is something to this other woo type of free will that gets put forward. I think it's a meaningless term. I don't think there's something behind it to even say that it's the opposite of determinism. It seems like every kind of free will we've come up with has no issue working in determinism. So why add an extra term to it?
I don't understand. What's incoherent about the fact that the same person in the same situation doesn't need to make the same choices? That's all they're saying. Like, what's incoherent about that?
I think the issue is that if you are going to have no determining factor for that behavior, then it is essentially, it's chaotic. I mean, then how can you say that how can you attribute responsibility for someone's action when it's coming from literally nothing?
But that's not what they mean, right? It's like the same thing when someone says, well, morality is objective, but it comes from the mind of God, and someone counters with, well, that's not objective, that's subjective, it's dependent on the mind of God. Like, it's a semantic game at that point. I mean, when hard determinism is essentially the same person physically, in the same physical situations, has to make the same choices. But, like, I don't see why that's incoherent to say, no, they don't. Because there could be something outside of that which basically isn't constrained by either one of those things, and that's an influence. Like, I don't see how that's incoherent.
Right. So this is sort of a similar scenario to the one that Max brought up. So you're saying that there is freedom within this limited system if you ignore other contributing factors. So that is the case. That can happen. But I think that we don't want to stop just there. Like in your example, we want to go, okay, well, what is this thing that's causing the apparently, unpredictable behavior? Is it principled? If it's principled, well, then it's determined. If it's not principled, then essentially there's like this random beacon telling you to go left, go right. Therefore, the agent can't take responsibility for those actions because they are.
I don't see why, because basically, like, it doesn't need to be constrained by the environment. Like, imagine a thing which is, I mean, like, you can say, yes, it's determined by the thing that is making the choices. And you can say, okay, well, then it's determined then. But, like, in the same way, you could go to someone who has libertarian free will, and you could say, okay, so where does that come from? Then classically they say, well, that's God or whatever it is. And you could say, well, is there something that constrains God? And you could say, well, God's nature, whatever. And then you say, well, then God doesn't have free will. I mean, you can always take it to some level where you can say everything is determined because you make your definition of determined so broad it catches everything in it. But I mean, that's classically not what the determinism means. Like, if you want to give determinism such a wide definition, then it becomes almost useless as a definition because it encompasses everything then.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of a global perspective.
Right.
Because, once again, I think that if you apply anything else to the situation, then the concept of responsibility disappears from the agent.
I don't see why that follows.
I want to harp on Cliff. Are you saying that? Let me see if I get this right. Are you saying that libertarians are not incoherent because there could be some other thing that could come in and influence, even if you repeat the universe over and over again?
Yeah, I don't see why that's incoherent.
So, but that's what I don't see. I agree that may not be incoherent, but what I don't see is how is that not a description of determinism? You're just saying it's possible that there be another influence that could come in and change things. But I would say if I were a hard determinist, which I think maybe I am, although I'm not so sure anymore, that well, yeah, but you're just introducing something that wasn't there before, and you're saying, look, here's an additional cause that could result in a different effect. So, right. Yeah, so that doesn't seem to me to be anything other than determinism.
Right, so as I said, like, the classical view of determinism is you take the same physical person in the same physical environment, and they have one choice, and that's the choice that they make. What I'm saying is, if there exists something outside of the physical body and the physical environment, that doesn't have to be true, and I don't see it as incoherent. Now then you can say, well, let's just step back, and let's say determinism has to be the exact same physical body and the exact same physical environment, and it has to be the exact same everything metaphysical has to be the exact same thing. Well, in that situation, does the same thing play out? And even a libertarian will say, well, yeah, of course it does. But they wouldn't say they're deterministic.
Cliff, are you sure that determinism applies only to the physical?
I'm saying basically, like, most Christians would say that God has free will.
It doesn't matter if God has free will.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't really finished my argument, so interesting to make. But anyway, so most Christians would say God had free will. However, most Christians would also say, but, okay, are we saying if we step back in time and that God went forward again, he would make different decisions? And they said, no, of course not. He'd do the exact same thing again. See what I'm saying? But they would say he had free will. They would also say he would make the exact same choice. God would never, like, that's one of the principal characteristics, right? God is immutable. His nature doesn't change, so he would always make the same choice. But they would still say God has free will.
But isn't the hallmark?
That's a mind blower for me.
But isn't the hallmark of
ask a Christian that question?
But isn't the hallmark of free will not whether or not you actually did make the same choice again, but whether or not you were free to?
Right. Would the same thing always happen? Do you only have one choice, and that's the one thing that happens all the time?
Well, a lot of Christians will say that the nature of God is good, and so God can't do what's opposed to his nature. So in that case, he is limited in some way.
Which I find creates a very interesting dilemma, because if the nature of humankind is wicked, and from time to time we can do something.
I don't believe that's the case.
And well, okay, but if
depends on your theology.
If the nature of mankind is wicked, which God from time to time says in the book, if the nature of mankind is wicked, and we can from time to time do something that is, that would be seen as righteous, does that mean that we can act against our nature where God can't?
We are special.
I'm not so sure. I mean, let's just setting aside that big sort of God question, and just going back to sort of this idea of is the idea of determinism limited to just obviously physical things? I would say that no. I mean, that's sort of the ultimate question, right? I mean, I would say that these internal things. Well, if so, here's the question: these internal things, are they physical or are they not physical? If these internal things are reducible to the physical, then you could say that determinism is in play, and that explains sort of everything. But if these internal things are something other than physical in some kind of way. I mean, maybe even if you just are going to say they're emergent but still exist, I think there's wiggle room there for a compatibilist view, regardless of the whole God thing. So that sort of angle then sort of puts the question to whether or not these internal things and what it is to be a self and what does agency mean and that kind of thing, and if an agent exists, can it cause things without itself being caused to cause those things, becomes more central, and you get away from these sort of older problems of could I have done otherwise and stuff like that, which after all I think it's pretty clear that's really not the issue anyway. So I think at root there's, as always, it seems to be this selfness issue, and is there an agent, and if there's an agent, is that agent a conglomeration of physical factors, or is there something more than that? Even if what is more than that is simply a kind of an emergent thing, if you're going to say that it's an emergent thing, maybe you would agree that it's more than simply a conglomeration or a mismatch or a culmination of all these physical things. So that kind of does change things, and I could see maybe a way that a compatibilist could wiggle in there in that sort of fact about selfness and agency that we don't have clear yet. Or at least, in my opinion, we don't have clear yet. Although maybe we do, and what's really going on is that there is something real there that's just not physical. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, the thing that I don't about examples or arguments against the fact that could not have done otherwise isn't meaningful. When people bring up the could not have done otherwise thing, they're talking about the actual person itself, free of external influence, could not have done otherwise. Like they don't always put that in there, but that's what that means, right?
No, wait. But you said external influence, and I don't think that's quite right. Because if brain chemistry counts, that's internal influence.
Right, but that's why it's.
I don't know what you mean by external. Then is what I'm saying.
Well, say for example, I mean, you don't need to go all crazy about the mad scientist or whatever it is. I mean, let's say, okay, so I go over to X's house, and X says that he's going to do something crazy, next say like rob a bank or do something at all like that. So I say, that's cool. When he robs the bank, I'm going to rob the money from him when he gets back. So I'm going to make sure this happens. Now, so I break into X's house later on that night, or read his diary or whatever it is, and figure out exactly what his plan is. Then I put a plan in place of myself that if at any point that X actually stops to do it, I'm going to move in and threaten that I'm going to blow up his family or something like that, that I'm going to make him happen. So he really actually could not do otherwise in that situation because I'm actually constraining him at that point. Even if he decides, screw this, I'm not going to go do it, I'm going to step in and going to make him do it. So from an external point of view, he always has to do it. But that's not what people talk about when they talk about, like, could have done otherwise. They mean go look at Xbox himself, free of external situations. So if he could actually choose, then they would say something differently than if you could never choose. The external agent, I think, complicates it and throws a big red herring in it. It's not what people are asking about when they say could have done otherwise.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. That's not what that's not what I was thinking at all. But yeah.
But when we act, right? We act based on the circumstance that we're in. That's what we're responding to. So it's sort of there's a back and forth there. Sort of acting without external influence is acting based on what exactly? Like how would you act without external influence? I don't think it's possible.
Right, but libertarians say that you can. Libertarians say you are not constrained by the external environment. That doesn't determine the outcome of the choices that you make, strictly. It may influence it, but it doesn't in any way constrain it.
So it's just the external environment. So in other words, then it's not really a problem, because if you have, let's say, an abstract concept of what you are, that abstraction is free of the external environment. So you get data coming in as to what your situation is, and then you respond to it based on that abstraction. It acts as a sifting mechanism.
Right, so that's why I said before, if you want to take the position that by determinism you mean everything is exactly the same, even all things that are metaphysical, not just you, but all things in the entire universe, physical and metaphysical, are exactly the same, then does it play out? And I bet you a libertarian will say, well, of course it does. Just ask one.
Right, but
they would say they're not a determinist.
But I would simply point out that in order for the situation to be correct, your state of mind would have to be the same as well. So your state of mind is not free of this situation where everything is the same.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So like you take someone who's a libertarian, and you say, okay, we're going to step back in time to point X, and everything in the universe, physical and metaphysical, is rolled back to the exact same point. Now let's step ahead. Are the exact same things going to happen? And a libertarian, I guarantee you, will say, well, yes, but they won't say they're determinist. They'll say, yes, but that's not determinism. Just ask one.
Okay.
Well, oh, that's, so this is something interesting, because I really don't quite understand the pure libertarian point of view, because it seems to me like they're just saying, let's look at the world, and we see that free will is true, and we agree with incompatibilism, therefore determinism must be false. But I don't understand why they just, I mean, there are appeals to sort of, well, look how you feel. I mean, analyze what happens inside of you, and these kinds of things. But I don't, it's very difficult for me to charitably understand a pure libertarian free willer. And
I don't really get what the struggle is. I think like we're speaking and we're sort of crossing roads, and we can never get on the side of the roads. Like when I was talking to Rocco one time, and he was saying stuff, and I was like, "You sound like you're being rational to yourself, but you're coming off kind of crazy to me, and we're not getting on the same field with each other." That happens sometimes, right? So and I don't want to bring Big G into this. But the easiest example is to go back and think, if I rolled back time from an observer point of view, and I could go back and actually be in the time where Christ came down and was crucified, would Christ and would God and Christ make the same decisions again? And almost, I can't imagine a Christian who would say, no, it's not guaranteed they'd make the same decisions. They would say, well, of course God would make the same decisions. And then you're saying, are you saying God doesn't have free will? And they're saying, no, that's a stupid thing to say.
The reason why we would say that is because we, I mean, even an Arminian who believes in free will say that God ordained certain things to happen, and they would say that the atonement was ordained.
Maybe he just thinks it's a good choice, so he keeps making
free will to the one in charge is kind of a. I don't really think you can do that, because he's not constrained by anything we are. So I don't think on any level you can ascribe that aspect of our humanity to him at all, because he has no need for it. He's God.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the viewpoint that simply because all the metaphysical things and the physical things are the same, that the same actions are carried out, isn't what any libertarian would call determinism.
Right. So
what are they saying? Okay, so you're saying that libertarians, in fact, don't agree with what determinists claim determinism is. So what do they say determinists should be saying that determinism is?
I've never heard a determinist claim that when they say things are the same, they mean physical and metaphysical things.
Oh, really? I mean, maybe that's because determinists of that sort are causal or physical determinists.
Well, just take the point of view. Find someone who's like a full libertarian, and ask them, go back in time to point X, make all physical and even all metaphysical things exactly the same thing. Does everything roll out the same? And I guarantee you they'll say, well, yes. Because if they say no, they mean whatever the thing is that's making free choices is acting irrationally.
Right.
So how are they not determinists?
Because that's not what they mean by determinism. In the same way, like compatibilists don't mean what libertarians mean when they say free will.
Okay, I literally didn't follow.
So now,
I have to ask you to repeat, and I apologize about that. Did you say that a libertarian would say that physical and metaphysical things would be exactly the same in a rerun?
I said, if you constrain the experiment so that all the physical things and all the metaphysical things were exactly the same way, would the things roll out the same way?
And the libertarian says, yes, obviously, but that's not what determinists are getting at.
Right, and they would say, yes, everything is going to happen the same way. And then you would say, but isn't that determinism? They would say, no, that's silly.
Okay, what's silly about that?
Because that's not how they define determinism.
Well, how do they define determinism then?
They don't include all the metaphysical things in it. That's what gives libertarian free will, the metaphysical.
That's cheating.
Feels like cheating. But that could be because you don't believe in metaphysical things.
But that's
because you're all going to hell.
But they think, they have contra-causal free will, and that they don't think that whatever they do is connected to the rest of the world, and that's bullshit. I mean, there are laws of physics that they have to follow regardless.
Welcome back,
and a lot of their motivations can actually be understood to have determined external factors behind them.
Helena?
Yeah.
I wrote a question in here a couple minutes ago that I think you'll understand why I wrote it. Can I just read it off real quick?
Yeah.
I said, this may sound like a juvenile question, but why is this such an important question? We can't really decide which is the right option, and I'm not sure why we struggle. It appears we have choice, so why do we need more explanation other than for some other religious aspect? What does it really matter whether we're any of these? If it appears we live in a reality and it appears we have choice, why does, whether we determine or whether we're compatible, what does it matter? I don't get it. And I think you understand why I'm asking that question.
Yes, I do. So it matters for a lot of sort of, cognitive reasons, but the sort of what it really matters about, why most people think it's important when they think about it, is because of the moral implications. And the moral implications lead to, potentially, should we change our laws? That's kind of the idea. Right? So if in fact, literally everything is determined, then can you hold a murderer morally responsible for the murder? That's the first question. And then, regardless of whether it's yes you can or no you can't, are there further implications about how we actually practically treat people that should be re-examined, perhaps?
Can I offer, Helena, that it might not be that you have to consider whether you punish the murderer, it's what punishment is appropriate, right? So if justice, in my view, is a deterrent more than an exercising of vengeance or anything like that, then certainly, even though I'm a determinist, I have certain reasons to have prison sentence be a certain way, or to have it's effective towards determinants, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. But the original question before you came back was, why does this even matter? I mean, why do people struggle over this? What's the big deal? And so I was saying, well, that's one of the big deals.
I was on a murder trial probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I had to come to grips with how I felt about this woman who grew up in central LA, part of a gang. Her family was like ancestral gangs. They were Crips, and she killed someone. And I still voted. I ruled that she was. I said that she was guilty. I persuaded others that she was guilty. We ended up indicting her or not indicting her, but actually finding her guilty on the charges. But that was, in my view, she couldn't have. She had such a polluted past that this woman's life was wrecked. She had no good influences in her life at all, and that's an extreme case. I don't think determinism has to go to that level, but I had to actually be okay with the fact that this is a deterrence against future action. We have to punish crimes like this. We have to hold people responsible, even though, and when I say that, that means that is another factor in the causal matrix, right, towards other people not behaving that way.
Right.
Well,
so that's one of the reasons why that's one of the ways that somebody can maintain even a very hard deterministic outlook and keep all of our laws the same.
Hard deterministic outlook, jeez. You make it sound so grim, this determinism business.
No. I think determinism, I have an optimistic determinism.
Yeah, but we are changing our laws. That's what I was about to say earlier when I was going on about that thing with Xbox. There's a number of cases that have come up now that make people think very differently about how we lay down responsibility and how we punish people. A couple of the cases are relatively famous. They involve people who have done what we would consider to be absolutely horrible things, acts of pedophilia or acts of murder. And what we've found out sometimes post-mortem after they were dead is they had a tumor growing on part of their brain that literally flooded them constantly with these hormones that we know induce rage and violence, or hormones that induce massive sexual appetites. And one of the individuals found it out before he was killed, and they removed the tumor, and suddenly they all went away. He became perfectly normal again. And a couple of years later, he started noticing a way that he started getting these weird perverted thoughts about his daughter, and he was like, it's the same goddamn thing. And he went back to his doctor, and the doctor was like, yeah, it's that friggin' tumor. So he took out the part of that tumor again. He was perfectly fine again. Now, so in this situation, everyone feels sympathy for that man. They say, geez, what a horrible thing that he got that tumor. But why is there a hard line there between the person who is naturally born with a brain that produces the same hormones, but it's not a tumor causing it? That's just the way that the brain actually produces those hormones. Why is that such a hard line? And it's a very difficult question to ask. Why are we sympathetic to one person because he gets a tumor when he's 14, but we're not sympathetic to the other person who has his brain that way since he was born?
Exactly. So James, the deal with that is that the point of everything he just said is that if in fact free will is an illusion, we shouldn't feel differently.
Exactly.
Right? So we feel it's possible that the reason that we feel differently is because of this fallacious idea that there is such a thing as free will. Yes. That's why these discussions have been going on for so many years, and why so many people feel like it's an important thing. Does that make sense?
Then how do you ever require anybody to meet goals or meet any standard because they can't help themselves when they fail?
That's incorrect. And to answer that and to answer James, so the issue here is that we need to understand this, because people tend to give themselves way too much credit when it comes to their ability to make choices based on this idea of free will. And we have this illusion about people that through the power of will, through sheer will, they can get through, they can achieve incredible things, for example. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this in The Outliers and sort of tried to dispel this myth that through sheer force of will, people can, like Bill Gates can exist. But the truth is that we accomplish things, or we prevent disaster through our environment, through the people we know, through the people we love, etc. So we can give our will too much credit. And on the other side, when it comes to determinism, you are still making choices. There's no such thing as opting out of a choice. So if you go into like a depressive state and going, oh my God, you know, there's you know, so much influence, external influence on me, pushing me in this one direction. Well, you're still making a choice about that. Whether you act on it or not is still a choice.
That destroys Calvinism.
Actually, no, that's what Calvinism is. Calvinism says, yeah, you were this is, you know, you were slated to do this, but fuck you.
Yeah. You still get the wrath. It's just that you were designed to be an object of wrath. Have a nice day.
Go ahead, Bert.
I was just going to say to James's question earlier was that I felt like, and I mentioned this in the chat, that the to some degree the distinction is that in some cases people can operate with a rational process where they can appreciate the consequence of their actions, and even though we know that there's my belief is that both agents would be caused and have their wills caused by things up to that point. One is deliberating and one, because of a tumor or other things, is not able to have a balanced deliberation. And that's, I think, the gauge we're talking about is that within the causal influences, one is actually able to deliberate and make a choice, whereas one is coerced by physical factors at a more not a deeper level, a more thorough level that denies the deliberation, any possibility going one way or the other. But I don't know.
Yeah, but you're just assuming that, right? You're just assuming. Okay.
I'm assuming a lot of this, so.
Wouldn't you say that everybody has a deliberation? It's just like the factors involved are different for people, like.
Yeah, but then so what you guys told me when I brought up deliberation and I said I think you could make multiple choices in this situation, you said but you wouldn't be able to choose otherwise because of.
You can.
Well, because the question is like, how do you choose? Like, what do you choose, Deirdre? What is it you choose when you're stuck between two options? What is it that you choose?
Right. So I was saying, like, for example, you could choose self-interest versus society's interest.
But how can you prove that society's interest isn't also your own self-interest?
The way that I see it is that the will that you're talking about is the you. Like that's the thing that confuses me, is if you kick it back to some other process, you're still wanting to say that it's something that's making a choice, right? You're not saying that it's a random choice. You're saying that there's something, that there's a ghost in the machine, or there's a ghost in the ghost in the machine. Like it keeps going back. Eventually, you're going to want something that is caused to make a decision based on your either your theology or based on your exposure to it, or your upbringing, or like even if you kick it back from your immediate will, ultimately, unless you're talking about some indeterminate randomness, you're talking about something that's directed by your experiences. That's what we want, right? Like that's why parenting and other things are efficacious, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Deirdre, when you say like you could pick something that would be better for society rather than yourself, why would you pick something better for society if you didn't care about society? Right? If you didn't care about society, you would pick the thing that was better for you.
Yeah, so it would depend on what's most important to you.
Right, and so what causes you to be a person who values one thing or the other? The deterministic assumption is that there are causes there. Sure. It's not just some,
I think you can choose
random
what you value a little bit. Like we all have natural values and natural inclinations, natural personality, but I think that you could choose within that limited realm of what you want to feed into, what you want to build upon, what you want to challenge yourself as, and I think that changes things, and so you have some choice there too.
How can you choose what you value?
Wait, there's a more base question here. Is what do you mean by you? When you say you can choose, who are you? No, that's really
just being like, let's have a separate agency, please.
You're talking about your will. Like that's the thing that I don't get, is I don't get the pushback on it. It is, we're talking about you. You are making the choice.
No, I mean I agree that
I must be the most conflicted person in the room, I guess, because I always have conflicts. Should I
No,
do
no. We all have them.
Yes.
That's not my. That is. I have no problem with what you're saying there, at all.
James sounds like he never has conflict. He plans something, it happens. That's it.
I don't even see why you think that.
No, he's like, if I want dinner, I'm having dinner. I'm like, man, my plans get thwarted all the time. I don't know.
No, it's not about that.
Just to say something real quick about what Bert said, I also, this is why I'm so reluctant to, in this very first hangout, even though it's been going on for God only knows how many hours, I'm trying to steer away from the whole agency thing, because I think at root that's really what it's about. I don't think it's about cause. I don't think it's about doing otherwise. I don't think it's about, external, internal. I really think it's about this business of self, right? But that is a huge issue, and there's so many variables that we should consider about that, right?
Yeah.
But so I just want to acknowledge that I really do kind of think that's what it's all about, and I'm steering away from it because that's such a huge can of worms.
But the thing is, Shanna was kind of stirring in the side chat. She's like, "What is I? What is I?"
Well,
maybe I was AFK at that point. Luckily.
So right, like what Helena just said makes a lot of sense. Like so when you're saying like you're conflicted, I get that. I understand that. I am conflicted all the time, and it feels like I can't decide. What do I do? Like, should I choose A or should I choose B, or maybe there's a third option? I don't know. And so I get that all the time. But at the same time, if I look back at it in hindsight, it feels to me like it's my brain caught in a loop. Like it's just like a computer going in a loop. Like, okay, well, oh, nope, indeterminate, start back at A and go through all the points again until nope, that didn't calculate, go back again. That's what it feels like to me, right, in hindsight.
Also.
So maybe conflict is really just your brain not being able to figure out the best solution easily. Or maybe it is you trying to determine the answer, but I don't know. Like, to me, I think it's...
Am I the only person in conversations that has like 15 thoughts at once, and I have to choose the best one in a matter of seconds? Like
no,
my filter is like, oh, must kick in, and sometimes when it doesn't kick in, I regret it.
Like, we're all like that. We're all like that.
I agree. We're all like that. And,
couldn't I have chosen anything to say out of those 15 things?
No, that's the thing. That's the key.
No.
That's the key. Could you have or could you not have, right? I mean, that's one of the keys. I think that there may be something to the compatibilist argument that that's not the real key, that we're kind of chasing a rabbit down the wrong hole. But I just want to say this really quickly. That we deliberate does not lend any evidence, one way or the other, towards deciding whether or not determinism is true. That's what I say, because it's very easy, you can just say, well, yes, we deliberate, and the deliberation is caused, right? And so that's sort of, the fact that we deliberate doesn't do much to help us decide this argument.
I think I guess my point is that you always ask free from what, right? What is the thing that you're saying that you're free from? There's no coercion going on. There's no other agent.
Start trying to control
your hand. There's no other agent.
There certainly is when it came to that woman that you were deliberating on. I mean, I think one of the things we need to remember is that if the army can take a person, a mild-mannered person, and turn them into a throat cutter in 6 weeks, imagine what living amongst the Crips would do to somebody in 18 years.
Right.
And I think beyond the pragma, I think if North American jurisprudence has more than one failing, and I could talk at length about its primary failing, but if it has more than one failing, it's that it forgets that there are a great number in North America and throughout the world. There are a great number of processes, factories, and people are put into those factories as raw materials, and they come out as products. And so we look at these products and we say, well, why didn't you become something else? And yet we forget that for at least 170 years, the United States has had a machine that makes soldiers. If you can have a machine that makes soldiers, you can have a machine that makes criminals, you can have a machine that makes the indolent, you can have a machine that makes people who are unable to make choices for themselves. And so, you know, Dex was talking about us overestimating how much, how did you put it, how much free will we had. And I think he's right. But I think the reason that you hold people responsible is that somebody has to. But where you can come in there, someone has to be responsible, but where you can ameliorate things is at the point of assessing penalty. That's that you can say to somebody, listen, you know, you grew up in a toxic environment, but somebody has to be responsible for the people you killed, and that's going to be you because you're the one that did it. But rather than put you in the chair, for instance, we're going to lock you up for the rest of your life, or we're going to exile you from people, or whatever. Like at that's the point where we take into account, you know, the processes and the manufactories that we have all over society that, you know, we nudge and wink at and then fucking sit there shocked and aghast when something comes out of them that we didn't expect.
Yeah, I think that you want to I think you want to have deterrence in there at some point, but I agree that you need to have compassion, and I would say that my outlook actually makes me want to actualize changes in society so as to change the conditions, right? And it's not that I think that we're all that it's a simple formula of us being that there's I don't see it being quite as direct all the time. I think the case in the murder trial is an obvious case, but I think we all have to I think to every degree, all of us are the product of all these some things bouncing around, and that's what we mean by you, right? Like when you're talking about Bert Poole, you're talking about a CG supervisor at DreamWorks with with my education that I have, and my parents and my wife and all these influences, and I am who I am. Like that is me. When you're talking about the you, that's me, right? That's what we mean of the person that if it was to go back in time, you could make another. You could decide again, and you would do the same thing because we're talking about you. We're talking about you at that moment would do otherwise, right?
So you're defining self as like this bundle of all these qualities. You're like, I am literally, you know, my emotions, my desires, my background. I am this bundle. So that's like bundle theory. And self is the bundle of all of these things.
It's the me in the moment that I'm making the decision, and if we were to rewind time and consider me in that moment again, the decision would be what it is, because that's me making the decision. And if you're going to say, well, no, but could you do otherwise? Well, who are you talking about then? We're talking about me in that moment. That's who I am. James, did you have some questions?
Oh, I got so many questions. I don't want to hijack what's been going on. I mean, it's, I guess the biggest, like, Helena knows me a little bit. I have Asperger's, so I have questions and questions and questions, and I need clarification on everything. So I'm trying to keep my thoughts down because I'm learning so much. But the ultimate, like the biggest questions I've had, I've already asked on the side, and it's like I understand why we need to figure out how this works. We need to run a justice system somehow. We need to decide what to do with these people who break the social contract. I get that. So is there a way you can determine the word? If we don't have free will and we have this deterministic view, do we have to therefore jump to some external metaphysical creator being essence?
Absolutely not.
Okay, that's the only question I have. And
no, absolutely not. In fact, in my opinion,
then what do we do with that idea when you've got religions all dependent upon this being doing that?
Yeah, so you're asking two questions, right? The first question is...
I'm trying really hard to keep one at a time, but you know...
so the first question is, if we really determine at some point that determinism is true, How would that change what we do legally? And separately, you're asking, what about all these religious people, and how does the fact of determinism, supposing it were proven, affect them? I see those as just two distinct problems.
Absolutely.
Especially for America, where, ostensibly, we have this separation, so that we don't have to deal with whether or not there are supernatural creatures when we decide, how to arrange our penal system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you need to worry about the religious aspect necessarily. I mean, clearly it's important, but as far as the other question goes, I don't think that the religious question, if determinism is true, necessarily must be considered.
Well, that's just it, because if it is decided that that is the true way to do it, then you have a whole bunch of religious people saying, "Aha, we were right," right? And
I disagree with that. I mean, I think that I've got good grounds to disagree with that, because let's just pull one religion. Let's look at Christianity. Even inside of Christianity, you have a disagreement about this very issue, right? It's not like every single Christian thinks humans are determined, or every single Christian thinks that because of the problem of evil or whatever, therefore we must have free will. Right. So they're just as the debate rages regardless of your opinion about whether or not they're supernatural entities.
Right.
Right.
I completely understand where you're coming from, because I lived that life for 35 years.
Well, yeah, I know. I forgot about that. Right. So you could see how that's not necessarily. There aren't any implications about what do we do with religious people if it were proven that determinism is the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Do you agree?
I completely agree. We can have all of these answers without a metaphysical thing, which is why I kept questioning Cliff's inclusion of one.
Yeah, so Cliff was I think trying to, and I came in the middle of that because I was gone for a while, but I think that he was trying to show how some of the ways that somebody could really be a libertarian free willer. Yeah. And that was sort of one of the ways.
I think I caught that after about the third time he explained it, and I stopped questioning on it.
Yeah, I just don't find it incoherent. I don't believe it's true.
You don't believe it's true, but you also think that it's perfectly reasonable. And I don't know if I agree with you quite yet, although I gotta say...
It's all right, you can be wrong.
Indeterminism is... I used to kind of laugh it off, because I used to think, well, even if we assume, or presume, or, conclude, or whatever, that the consensus from the quantum mechanic geeks is that, at least on a quantum level, reality is not determined. Then, well, it doesn't make much difference, because on the macro level, we all agree it is determined and Newton's laws fit and all of that. But now, just like yesterday, I started thinking, hold on, maybe there's more wiggle room there than I sort of originally thought. So I'm kind of sort of considering that as a potential way that maybe I could see myself as a compatibilist.
Well, one thing you have to be very careful of is simply because something is absolutely true to you and rational to the point of it being self-evident doesn't mean it actually is true. I mean, essentially, one of the things that becomes quite obvious if you study any amount of math is that you can do some kind of proof, you can do some kind of evaluation, and it can be completely obvious and it can be completely rational, and you can be 100% confident in it, and it's still utterly and completely wrong. So we're not that great at doing, one of the things I tell somebody about, the only thing that I know about myself is that I'm not very good at knowing things. That's the thing that I'm most certain about anything.
And yet you don't even know that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's never really gets me to the point where I'm absolutely certain about something. It's 100% rational to me to the point that it's self-evident. Doesn't actually mean it's true. It just means that that's essentially the conclusion that I have now because that's the conclusion I have now. That's the warranted conclusion. But it doesn't mean that it's true. So when I was saying about, like, even if I find a position completely intractable, it doesn't mean it's not true. It just means I find it completely intractable. There's many other reasons why it could be intractable to me and still be completely true.
Yeah. Yes. I agree with you in principle.
And that's one of the nice things about that I've noticed about this hangout that's very different from some of the other ones, that at not one time in this entire hangout that's been going on for some time has anyone ever made the argument that is false because it's intractable to me. That's very common if you listen to other hangouts. Like, that's completely irrational to me, which is the part they don't say, therefore it is wrong. Like, that's one of the silliest things I think anyone can ever say.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, but it's this, you know, maybe this issue or maybe the collection of people or who knows what, right? I don't know, but I think that, you know, you're not going to get a lot of you're full of it because I can't figure out what you mean if sort of you all agree that you're going to just explore the issue.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting. I mean, we have Christians here. We have people who are not Christians of various degrees. I mean, Shanna was in. She's a deist, and in all throughout the hangout, it was people talking about what they thought about what they knew, and that never came up once. So I think it's a very positive indication. It's unfortunate that this can't be more commonplace. Because I said to Joe when he was on the outside, I was like, "Come on in. This is what G+ is supposed to be like."
I don't understand what you're talking about, Cliff, so you're wrong.
Well, before you start
I'm kidding.
causing trouble, I will generously and, you know, take full credit for all of this. so obviously, I mean, it doesn't even need to be backed up. It's just an obvious fact that your satisfaction with the hangout is due precisely and only to me. So you must show up again.
Omnipotent overseer.
All right, well, so on that wonderful note, I'm going to take it off air. I'll keep it open, but I'm going to take it off air because I'm going to need to step away, and the last time I stepped away, when I came back, I had no clue what was going on. So thank you so much, everybody. This was really fun, and maybe we'll get back to this issue again, and we are going off air.